Good evening and welcome to the Montgomery County Civic Federation Symposium on Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative. This proposal of the Planning Board is pending before the Council and would eliminate single-family zoning in most of the county, and bypassing master plan processes will allow multifamily homes to be built by right on single-family lots in most neighborhoods. The stated goals of the Planning Board are to increase housing supply, typologies, and affordability, as well as to undo past harmful effects of zoning and segregation. The implications for neighborhoods, the built environment, and adequacy of public infrastructure may be very significant, particularly in areas within a mile of metro, Purple Line, Marc stations, BRT routes, and along growth corridors. In April of this year, the Civic Federation hosted senior planning board staff to make the case for this proposal. Also in February of this year, we hosted former planning director Gwen Wright to explain the background and the policy considerations behind this proposal. Tonight, we bring additional important voices and perspectives to the discussion. We will explore whether the proposal as written will be effective in meeting the needs of our communities, where the greatest needs lie, and the potential for negative unintended consequences. We do have an affordability crisis in housing in this county, particularly for our valued workforce, including police officers, teachers, and firefighters. The situation is unacceptable, and solutions must be sought that work through the master plan process and are tailored to those in greatest need and use a data-driven approach to identify solutions that will be effective. It is important for civic associations to work together this year towards solutions that meet the housing crisis while also protecting and preserving what we love most about our neighborhoods. The Civic Federation adopted a resolution in the spring stating our desire to work with the council to find workable solutions for those who are struggling with housing. The format for tonight will be to take questions for speakers right after they speak. This is a large meeting. We're unlikely to be able to take every question. The best chance of getting through as many questions as possible is if they are typed into the chat box. Please type a capital Q and then your question so that we can quickly identify questions and read them. Please try not to use the chat box to talk to each other, as that will make it harder to find the questions. If you prefer to speak your question, you can raise your hand electronically and we will try and call on as many as time allows. If you're called on, you will get a message on your screen to unmute yourself first, and then we will call on you to speak. You will not be able to unmute yourself until you receive a message to do so. Once you're unmuted, please ask your question and please be concise in consideration of others waiting to speak. I will now introduce our first speaker, County Executive Marc Elrich. Marc Elrich was elected as county executive in 2018. Before that, he served 3 terms on the Montgomery County Council as an at-large member, and prior to that, he was a council member on the Tacoma Park City Council. For 17 years, he was a teacher at Rolling Terrace Elementary School in Tacoma Park. As a county council member and then as county executive, he's been responsible for landmark legislation, including leading successful efforts to increase the minimum wage in the county. Throughout his career, he's been a champion of improving tenants' rights, and he played a key role in legislation for rent stabilization. He's been a strong voice for making developers pay for a greater share of the infrastructure cost to build schools and transportation solutions. He was a leader in the fight to preserve 10 Mile Creek in Clarksburg area by limiting proposed development that would have threatened the health of Montgomery County's backup water reservoir. In my own personal experience, I know that the county executive has been significantly engaged with religious institutions looking to build truly affordable housing on their properties, including a project in my own neighborhood, and his support and counsel in those efforts demonstrate his longtime commitment to help those who are struggling the most. We appreciate your participation tonight, Mr. County Executive. If you'd unmute yourself, and the floor is now yours.
I think I'm unmuted. True?
Yes, we hear you.
So how's everybody doing?
Great.
Good. I'm glad everybody's great. Great is good. So where to start tonight? I think I guess first thing I want to start out by saying is that the theme of a lot of what I've been looking at is what's the problem, what's the remedy? Is this the right remedy? But also, what's the actual problem we're dealing with? And if you don't define your problem, it's really hard to come up with a remedy. So I want to talk a little bit about where this all started. And this was, goes back, I guess, to the 2017 to 18 timeframe when COG was doing an update of their regional projections. And somebody noticed there was a disconnect in the projections between the number of households and the number of jobs. And if we were going to get that number of jobs, we needed more households to provide the workforce. So they did a very unusual thing. Normally, you'd revise your projection. If you thought your projection was wrong for some reason, which no one has yet to define, your estimate of housing was just a mistake, then you would have just adjusted that number up by 10,000. And if you know the process, the way they do projections, there's a 30-year horizon, say 2020 to 2050, and then they update projections on 5-year horizons. So you'll see numbers for 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. So that's the way they do their projections. So you're trying to get to how much will be built on this 30-year horizon, and how many jobs do you anticipate coming on the 30-year horizon? And then the housing should reflect the growth in job numbers. So when COG discovered that there was a mismatch and they had not enough housing to support the growth, instead of revising it, they declared everybody had to add we had to add 10,000 units in Montgomery County to our number. That was our proportionate share, I guess, of the total number they said to add to the region. Now, normally, the way that would have been done, they would have looked at their projections and moved forward some of the housing units that were planned for the years after 2030. So you would have looked at years 35, 40, 45, and 50 and said, well, if there's more demand earlier, then we should move some of those units to where the demand is going to be, which would have been 2025 and 2030. That's the normal way it's done. And it makes sense. I would have had no objection to revising the numbers to match the jobs and to adjust all the other numbers, because it's indicative that the county's got a 30-year horizon of units that we've already zoned for. And so if there's demand you didn't anticipate, you would say instead of them being built in 2040, they'll probably get built in 2030 or 2025. None of this pipeline is tied to a timeline. In other words, if something's planned for 2040, it's not because the law says it'll be built in 2040, but it's because that's when they anticipate to have enough additional job growth to need the additional housing units. So that's the normal way we do things. And then for some reason, I have my own suspicions I don't need to go into. They turned this into housing targets. You have to add these many units as a housing target. Well, we've never looked at the forecast as housing targets. That's what we anticipated, that the private sector would both build and the private sector would bring these jobs here. So that's the normal way things happen. And it didn't happen this way this time. And from those projections and that they're stating these as targets has come what some people have referred to is, well, we need to meet our targets. Well, those were never targets. They were anticipated based on what people saw as growth in the economy that would then be reflected in growth and housing units. So the question is, what are we trying to solve for? If we're trying to solve for 10,000 units, this is a bit of overkill to rezone 82% of the county. If that was the thing that triggered this, how did we wind up here? And that's, to me, is like one of the fundamental questions. What do you need to do to make sure that you've got housing to meet the growth in population? And to your point, actually house the people who are most difficult to house, to address income levels that aren't normally approached. How do you do that? Those are the questions. This plan is not an answer to those questions. More zoning. If they don't believe zoning is going to happen, there's no guarantee that this would get built any more than any other zoning would get built. So the question is, why are we here and why are we having this discussion? So I want to show this slide that kind of illustrates my point. The chart. Somebody's going to share it on the screen in a second. Bear with me. Do you need permission to share? Yes? Could you give Debbie permission to share?
She should be able to share.
Got it? Okay. Yay, the print's okay. So what I wanted to show you here, I took the COG projections and they're separated into three groups. First is population, second is employment numbers, and the third are households. And round 9.2, which is the first row in each sequence, starts in 2015, it ends in 2045. And this shows the change in population that's anticipated over this 30-year frame from 2015 to 2045. So you can see for yourself, 2020, they projected 152,000, 2025, not 100, 1,052,000. In 25, they projected 1,087,000. And 2030, 1,128,000, so on. The line before underneath it is population, and that's round 10. So this is the last forecast they've done. And this forecast shows in 2020, they're projecting 9,000 more people than the round 9.2 forecast. Go to 2025. They're projecting 4.3 thousand fewer units or fewer people than were projected before. And in 2030, they're showing a little over 10,000 fewer people. So 2035 is 13,000 fewer people. 2040 is 7.5, and only in 2045 is the number in round 10 close to the number in round 9. Now notice, Park and Planning did not come back and say we need to revise our housing and job projections downward, or that the housing no longer needs to be an additional 10,000, because we've just dropped our projected housing units by the need for housing units by 10,000. That's the difference between 9.2 and 10.0 on the line. That's population, sorry, not housing units. So you can see how these numbers change from projection to projection. If you go down to the next line, the employment line, by 2020, the divergence between their 9.2 round and the round 10 is 49,000 fewer jobs. And it goes down. There's the 49.6 is the difference in 2025, 58.9 is the difference. It's fewer. There are 59 fewer jobs in 2035, 62,000 fewer jobs in 2040. 2045 shows 65,000 fewer jobs. So if jobs are driving demand, which is what they do, instead of an increasing demand and higher pressure on the housing market, what you actually see is they're projecting less employment in the county over this timeline. So if you took the logic they applied in 2017 and said, we have more jobs than we have housing, we need to increase the housing supply, this chart tells an opposite story. The pressure on your potential build out is actually less, because the job numbers, the employment numbers are going down. So whatever logic drove them to say if job numbers go up, you need to increase the housing, they're not applying the same logic to this line. And finally, there's households. And again, you see in 2020 versus their round 9.2 on the top is 4,500 units fewer households than we're projected in 9.2. For 2025, it's 7,200 fewer households. For 2030, you're still at 5,800 fewer households. In 2035, you're at 4,000 fewer households. And by 2040, you're still down 900 households. So we don't even get back to coherence with the 9.2 projection until 2040. And in 2045, there's 1,300 more units than were projected in the round 9.2 forecast. So it's a way of demonstrating that for whatever reason, these two things were treated one way in 2017 and completely ignored in the forecast going forward. So you can stop sharing it. So this is one of my most serious problems with this. It defies logic. I mean, if you're going to upend all the zoning in Montgomery County and your own projections don't show that you're not even pressing against the zoning you've put in place, why are we doing all this? And that's I think a question that everybody should ask. I mean, we are planned in all of our master plans through 2050 to produce not even all the housing that's in the master plans. Every 5-year projection is just a percentage of the housing they think will get built on these 5-year intervals. Does this make sense to you guys? I know it's numbers. I get accused of using numbers, but I don't know how to explain things that are numbers without using them. Okay, so I'll stop there and I'll go on to the other things I wanted to say, but I wanted to set that up because you're being asked to undertake a major changing in how we do zoning. And I can't see a rationale for what's being proposed. If this was a discussion about affordable housing, which they've made a point of saying that attainable housing has nothing to do with affordable housing, we'd have a different discussion about what we need to do to figure out how to conquer the very steep slope of the difference in affordable units and the people who need them. Right now in Montgomery County, there are about 50,000 households who earn less than $50,000. They earn less than it takes to qualify for an MPDU, and they're really struggling to build the affordable housing we need. And the targets that COG gave us, we would be extraordinarily difficult to achieve, given that the county only gets 12.5% to 15% of any market rate development is affordable. It's hard to hit a target of 75% has to be moderate or affordable when you're only requiring a very small percentage of the housing to be affordable. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear housing is built as a result of demand. You just can't say you're going to change your target. Targets should be based in some underlying number that leads you to believe that you needed that target. I would say, like I said before, I would agree with adjusting the totals based on what they thought they saw in 2017, but it's kind of hard to justify it in 2024 when the projected numbers are actually lower, not higher. And you just can't get to the number you want just by saying you're going to build more housing. Housing comes as a result of demand. And one of the hardest things we're dealing with, we have over 30,000 units that are permitted right now, and which is enough to meet all the demand for housing over probably the next 5 and 10 year period. And they're not being built. Those are only the ones that are permitted. Those aren't all the housing units that are in the master plans. So we have an enormous capacity to build housing right now. And the question we struggle with is, how do we get the housing built? So I guess in my mind, this all matters because, we've been doing long-term planning and master plans for a very, very long time now. I served on the council. I can't even count the number of master plans we did in my 12 years there. But every master plan increased the development envelope and increase the anticipated housing units that we'd be able to build. And I know when Park and Planning did a study on White Flint, they asked why the White Flint developers weren't building. They were told by the White Flint developers that because the rents aren't high enough. Because what they wanted to build doesn't match the incomes of the people who either live here now or are projected to come here, at least not in the numbers that they want. More recently, a developer in Pike and Rose wanted to shrink his project from 3 high-rise buildings to which would yield 2,000 units to a project that would yield 1,000 units. And by the way, he was working with the county to provide half of 1,000 units as affordable housing, unprecedented number. And the planning board's threatening not to approve his project because they had previously approved high rises and they want high rises. His response was, there's not a market for 3 high rises. But there's a market for lower rise housing because it's less expensive to build than high rises are to build. So we have living examples of where the density gets in the way of building affordable housing. And, you know, the example in Pike and Rose is a really heartbreaking one. I hope Park and Planning does not continue to try to stymie the development. But when a developer is telling you there's no market and I want to build what there's a market for, and planning says you should build what we say rather than what you think the market is, that's a problem. And that's one of the things we're dealing with right now. So, you know, we've redesigned and planned much of the county. There are none of the units in, for example, White Oak have come to fruition yet. There are thousands of units there. There are thousands of units on the property in White Flint where the mall was, the White Flint Mall was. There are literally tens of thousands of units that we've already planned for in the county that have not been built yet and will be built as demand begins to set in.
So, Mr. County Executive, some of the participants are asking for a pause to ask some questions on what you've said already,
Sure.
if you don't mind. Liz Joyce, will you read some of those questions from the?
Yes, I would point out to everybody, please put your questions in the form of a question rather than a statement, so that the county executive can answer them. The first question, Mark, was what do you mean by they? Are you referring to the planning board and the council? That was
At this point, they is the planning board.
Okay, there's the planning board, whose views have been accepted by have been transmitted to the council.
Yes.
They are through with their ruminating, apparently. Okay, people want to know why behind your analysis of the mismatch between the projected numbers and of homes and jobs. How did it happen that the whole planning process was changed to a different way of doing things from what you were used to?
Well, it's not just what I was used to. I mean, this is Montgomery County's planning tradition for as long as you've had a council and a planning board. I mean, we've been doing, I think, you know, long range plans since at least 1960, you know, with the first general plan. I don't know if it's the first, but it's the general plan I was most familiar with. So there was a way of doing things, you know, it involved working with neighborhoods. We worked with what they thought were projected growth in jobs in the county. We looked, you know, you looked at a community to see where you could put that, but things were always tied together. Nobody just made up a number and said, you need to do this. Now we're dealing with like a number which, at least at the time, may have had some validity, but the number doesn't have validity now. But even that number, 10,000 units, since I would assume the planning board knows their own processes and knows how many units were in the pipeline, which I know they know, and knows how many units were in master plans, there was no reason to say we need to change all our processes and do something different. And I'll say, you know, Montgomery County is different than some of the places that are doing some things right now that planning board's proposing, but there are often places that are built out. There's cities where you'd be hard put to find anything but an occasional abandoned lot in the city. And that if you're going to increase, if you're going to have a larger population, you're likely to have to look at what are you going to do to change zoning in order to get more housing into the community. If that's if that's what you're seeking to do, if you're trying to bring more jobs there. But Montgomery County is a suburb, and we have tons of units that are already planned to be built, and we haven't even come close to running up against them. You can see from the chart I showed that we had on the screen before, those all those units in there are planned units, and they're not the sum total of the planned units. They're only part of the planned units, and no year represents all the planned units that existed in the county. And the last year, now 2050, does not include all the planned units that exist in the county. And a lot of the places that aren't in downtown Bethesda or downtown Silver Spring are places where the zoning actually is more likely to yield a mix of affordable housing, a mix of townhouses at different price points, because they didn't put the high density in every place in the county that they put in Bethesda and Silver Spring, and to some extent into Rock Spring. So we've got the capacity, near as I can tell, to handle the future growth. And, you know, having worked on it for those many years, these are real decisions we made to put housing in different parts of the county. But it's a matter of time. We know, like in White Oak, I mean, nothing's being built in housing because nothing's been done in terms of a plan to go forward with housing, with the retail they were hoping for and the jobs they were hoping for. You have a developer now who's going to move that project forward. I fully believe that they're going to be doing what they need to do. That you will see the houses get built there. If we do what we're trying to do in Bethesda, North Bethesda, I'm sure the housing in the master plan will wind up getting built. But it's only going to get built when you start parking jobs there and people say, I want to live here because this is where my job is. So I can't explain their logic, but that's as close as I can get.
I didn't mean to really interrupt your presentation. I'm sorry. There were just some questions on what you had covered so far. So for example, there's one question about the Council of Government Forecast 9.2 and 10. When were they generated? Are they the most recent ones?
So 10 is the most recent.
Okay.
And 9.2, they were working on, I guess that's the one that triggered what they did in 2017. Those were the numbers that led to the distress.
And someone has a question of the Council of Governments. Who are they?
Let's see, I served on the Council of Governments Transportation Planning Committee. Different council members have served on the board, the regional board. Some served on COG's air quality analysis. So different council members from jurisdictions serve on different committees, and then there's staff.
Okay. So we have one question from Mr. Rothstein, and then we're going to have you go back to your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Am I coming through?
Yeah.
Yes.
I've studied what our county executive Marc is telling us, both everything he has produced and some independent research, and it comes down to three reasons why this plan that is proposed is very irrational. Number one, it's unnecessary. Number two, it's self-defeating. It won't meet the aims of attainable housing because of market forces. And number three, it's going to cover the wrong locations. And let me just go back real quickly. It's unnecessary because there is enough new stuff in the pipeline already, even to satisfy wild estimates. And then secondly, it's self-defeating because the new structures will be more expensive because of market forces than the existing structures in most cases, for more expensive for renting and buying. And thirdly, on the wrong location, it's the least suited place where they propose doing this. For example, in CCW, Chevy Chase West, right near downtown Bethesda, the infrastructure can't handle it. It'll be overburdened. There's not enough permeable land. Marc has pointed this out, that you get runoff and flooding if you have too much built up land, no permeable land. And the sewers will be overtaxed, the gas lines, the electrical grid, the parking, the schools. And I think Marc has pretty much demonstrated elsewhere that there's much better places in the county where these strains and problems don't exist, where this could be done. And then all of this is not to mention the disruption in daily life, the way downtown Bethesda has been disrupted for years. Imagine having next door to your house, the building of these houses, the effect on the kids, the schooling, emergency services can't get through because there's years of construction, the pollution. And remember, it's not just duplexes and quadruplexes that would be licensed by this plan, but there's provision for getting permission to build 19-story buildings along corridors like Wisconsin Avenue, for example, in CCW, Chevy Chase West. So I think Marc has done a fantastic job of this. It's a shame the law doesn't allow him to veto this, but apparently it doesn't. And I'm glad we voted for Marc and not so glad we voted for some of these other people.
All right, we're going to let the county
I'm not
executive
going to answer that
go back
question.
to his presentation now.
There's I have 3 quick points on things. One is, to accomplish this is going to be a massive increase of impervious surface. If you've seen any of the pictures of what these look like, and we've taken pictures of these lots in Virginia or plans for lots in Virginia, you're going to radically increase the impervious surface at a time when our stormwater system already can't handle it. We planned for this growth, for example, in activity centers. We planned for this growth in Wheaton and in Twin Brook, and to some extent in Glenmont, and all these other plans we did. And if you take the growth out of those places, which are already totally concrete, I'm not sure you could add more concrete to Bethesda or Silver Spring. So you're not going to have an impact on impervious surface by building there. You're not going to have an effect on heat island because the place is already covered over. But you start taking that density and start parking it along Georgia Avenue, Connecticut Avenue, Wisconsin Avenue, you're going to have all kinds of problems with imperviousness because you're radically reducing the places for water to penetrate. And it is going to be stunningly expensive. Now, our staff, when they were doing Thrive, gave them an estimate of what the infrastructure would cost. And I forget the number now, but it was, billions of dollars. And the response our staff got from the council and from the planning board was that we don't believe your numbers. That was the end of it. They didn't feel any need to go out and verify the numbers, to see what our assumptions were, to go ahead and, run their own numbers. They didn't provide their own numbers, so they should have. But the county government was responsible for providing estimates on what the infrastructure would cost. And the planning board and the council completely ignored. Now, this is not this council. So I'm not saying anything about this council. But the council that got that stuff, they had it and they were told what it was going to cost. And they just said, we don't believe it. I don't believe in that kind of analysis because it's really not analysis. The second thing is on transportation. And I'm a big proponent of bus rapid transit. My goal was to move people to try to get some of these roads unstuck. And the effect of this, if they're successful in putting large amounts of density along the corridors, is the roads are going to get worse. Already, we're struggling on the main corridors. And if you add all this density to the corridors instead of in the activity centers, instead of putting them around transit, you try to stretch them out along George Avenue in Connecticut and hope that a bus stop becomes a meaningful transit center. That's never going to happen. You don't have the money for the infrastructure to do it. And what it'll do to congestion in the county is going to be really miserable. And I will point out that a lot of these folks have a very urban mentality. I think they hate the fact this is a suburb and they would like it to be a city. The problem is we didn't start from day one by building a city here. If our foreparents had had the sense to extend DC's grid network into the suburbs so that you had a series of parallel and perpendiculars, congestion would be far less worse and it would be easier to move around. But these are the north-south roads in Montgomery County: Wisconsin Avenue, Georgia Avenue, Sligo Creek Parkway from New Hampshire Avenue to University Boulevard, University Boulevard from the University of Maryland to Wheaton, Connecticut Avenue until it runs into Georgia Avenue in Aspen Hill. That's it. If you look at a grid of a city, any city, and you lay a city grid, an urban grid over Montgomery County's road network, you do not have an urban grid. So try to do urban densities in a place that doesn't have a grid to support it is just a recipe for massive traffic congestion. And some people apparently are okay with it. Some people think, well, people just shouldn't drive cars. You don't have a transportation system that you can put in place that's going to handle the volume of traffic you're talking about if you try to pack all that in to these existing roads. So to me, it's problematic when you make plans that that you can't build the support. I'd say it could be a school problem, because if they were ever to build family housing, the hardest place to buy land and find land is in the more urban areas of the county. If you would try to build a school in Silver Spring or Bethesda, the most urban places, you'd be very hard put to find the land for a school. Same thing with recreation centers or anything else. So it's not very thought out as a land use design. And the thing I worry about in terms of the bigger issue of planning, we plan these activity centers and we plan this development in, say, a Wheaton or any of these other places. If you stretch that development out down Georgia Avenue, and if you wind up taking the people with the highest incomes, and that's who you will get buying the duplexes, triplexes, and quads that you build along Georgia Avenue in the interior of a neighborhood, you're going to deprive Wheaton and all these other communities that we're trying to get to grow and thrive from a key part of the population that you need to have balance in a community. If you take all the incomes out of that and park it into single family neighborhoods, you're just going to exacerbate the problem that exists today. And it's doubtful those centers would build out the way people had planned on them building out. In the meantime, you won't be getting centers anyplace else. And there's not enough density, even if you do double duplexes and quads, to create demand for grocery stores up and down Georgia Avenue or Connecticut Avenue or Wisconsin Avenue. It's just not possible in this 15-minute walking dream that people have. Anyway, that's enough on that. But I think those are other problems they really, really haven't, dealt with at all. The other stuff, if maybe I could ask you what kind of information you want. I mean, are you familiar with what they're talking about in terms of, it's about 82% of the county gets subject to rezoning. Pardon me? 82% of single family homes. Take note of where this doesn't go. They go all the way up to Boyd's, but they don't go to Falls Road, which is a pretty quick hop, skip, and jump to 270 in the Beltway. I wouldn't go there either, but it's interesting who they decided to leave out and who they decided to put in. Just like it's interesting that Thrive stops on River Road before it gets into Potomac at the request of a council member. So you go figure that out.
I saw that Andy Leon Harney has a number of questions. Andy, do you want to just get on and speak?
Andy.
Well, I just wanted to point out that it's not 19 stories tall, but 19 units is the maximum that could be put in these jurisdictions. And I think some people are concerned about the difference between an unelected planning board and the power they have and the council. And I think it would be good, Marc, if you could explain that in the best of both worlds, that it wouldn't end up the way it has.
Well, you're right about the 19 units, but there's something special about 19 units.
It avoids the trigger for MDPUs.
That's right.
Moderately priced dwelling units.
Coincidence or not a coincidence? I think, planning board knows exactly what they're doing. And so if you don't see something and you see people excluded, they know who's excluded. They definitely know what they're doing. There are some taller buildings allowed in certain parts of that zone. I'm trying to look at which sheet it was that has it on it.
The optional method.
The optional method.
Right.
Yes. So in the optional method, it does get bigger than 3 stories and bigger than 19 units. So that's, that's important to be aware of. There are, the listening sessions that they're having are, first one's next Wednesday at the Silver Spring Recreation and Aquatic Center. And then Thursday on the 12th, it's Wheaton Community Rec Center. Tuesday, the 17th, it's at White Oak Community Rec Center. Monday, the 23rd, is at Germantown Community Center. Wednesday, the 25th, in Bethesda's Chevy Chase Regional Services Center. And there's going to be a virtual session scheduled for Wednesday, October 2nd, from noon to 1:30. And you've got 2 hours at each of these sessions, and you've got to voice your concerns there. I mean, this is your last shot, because after that it goes to the council. We've already written our recommendations. We're not supporting this. There are some things in it that might be okay, but the general tenor of the decision to just wipe out the current planning process and replace it with this is not something we support. I don't think there was adequate information or meetings with the community to start with. It's not like this is terribly well advertised. It's kind of like Thrive, which was brilliantly done in the middle of COVID, where they couldn't stop working on it to let people be able to come to in public meetings and participate. This is another, I think, minimally involved process. And I know a lot of citizens feel that way. I don't know what to say about the planning board, the structure of the planning board. I appoint no one to the planning board. There are times when the executive made appointments. The councils in Prince George's County, the executive makes the appointments. In Montgomery County, the council makes all the appointments. I'm able to I can veto an appointment. I vetoed one, the council overrode my veto. Had I known what I know, I would have vetoed a second one. Do you want to play that clip? Yeah. I want to play a quick clip for you, and then I'll answer some of these other questions that are coming in. Okay.
Many of the questions go to the point of affordability, and
Yep.
I think that's the core. This is being sold as a means to increase the number of affordable units. But the planning board admits in this document that the housing that will be built will be market rate, which is expensive and it's not
Yes.
affordable. So the people are saying, well, what do you say to people who need an affordable home? And perhaps the question should be, what does the council and the planning board say to people who want an affordable home, and what are they doing to produce this? Because what they're going to produce is highly expensive housing and smaller housing in close-in areas. And I'm sure you can expand on that, but this is the core issue, and the messaging and the truth are very much at odds.
You want to listen to this. This explains a lot. This is Josh Linden. He's a member of the planning board.
The sound on your screen is muted, Debbie.
Of course, is have y'all go back, spend more time. I want to make one other point just related to perhaps process, because in the end, if the last thing we want to do, of course, is have y'all go back, spend more time, come back to us again. Like we understand it's already an expensive process, and we don't want to kind of belabor the point. If you have an agreement with the neighbors, ultimately, I think that's fine. I think my concern is, where can we kind of earlier in the process kind of express a little bit more of our preference and expectation to preempt some of the pre-negotiation that you may feel interested or compelled to do, which isn't to say, we should always talk to interested neighbors and talk to community groups and talk to, in this case, the neighboring condo association. But before kind of agreements are made on that level, that can reduce the scale and therefore make it harder for us to meet our goals. I mean, there's not that many of these. Well, unfortunately, there's probably too many of these sites, but like after we sort of chip away, you know, we really need to maximize these opportunities. I think that we as a board kind of need more opportunities to weigh in and make you feel more comfortable as applicants, you know, coming to us. Like the negotiation should really sort of, this is where I think a lot of it should lay. If neighbors want to come and request reduced size, they can come in front of the hearing, they come to the hearings. Obviously they can go to the meetings and talk to you all too, but I think that, you know, the negotiation happens here. In this case, we didn't have the opportunity to kind of weigh in, to express our preference that, you know, if you wanted to build 140, 150 plus units, like by all means, like that's awesome, go do it. And now you have an agreement, we don't want to waste more time and money, so I think that's fine. But maybe we can talk more about kind of processes and how we can express preferences earlier.
Yeah, excuse me, one good point. What was there ever a consideration of rezoning this property?
Marc, you're muted.
So apparently you guys really don't need to be listened to. It'd be much easier if it just got handled there and then they can listen to you, but really you get the agreement in advance with the planning board rather than with the residents. And, you know, that is not the role of a citizen person representative on the planning board. I mean, to me, this is really distressing. And when he talks about housing goals, there are no housing goals. These forecasts aren't goals, they're projections of what people think could be built based on jobs and available zoning. We have taken care of the zoning. We can house all the people who plan on coming here. We could have a discussion about whether we should, as I said before, reconsider some of the really high density and allow less density in some places. I don't mean small little 1 and 2 unit places where you could build an apartment building, but you could build apartment buildings that are affordable if you want to address affordability. And this has been, I know, an issue that a number of you have raised here, which I think is really important. Affordability is the biggest problem we face in Montgomery County. And with the rules as limited as they are, it was a big fight when I was on the council to get the number up to 15. We're in the negotiations that we do with developers, we've been pushing much higher numbers. And an example is that project in Pike and Rose, we're looking at 50% of a 1,000 unit project. We've been able to get reasonable numbers and being able to, and we have to put money into the deals. Nobody's giving us anything, but at least we had a developer here who understood the importance of providing some affordable housing. You don't see this in other places. We have developers who in Bethesda, they ask if they're doing condos to get relieved of their affordable housing burden, to give us some money to go away and let them build units that are not affordable at all. Now we, on the other hand, had success in the development where we actually got affordable units and an agreement to adjust the rents and not the rents, but the condo payments and the condo fees so that they would be affordable to the people that were supposed to get them. But that's a rarity when that happens. And, you know, I'm going to be submitting legislation. We're going to call it complete communities. That's going to require the planning board to plan for the entire community. They have to provide a mix of housing in any plan they do that addresses having a complete community there. You can't decide that some communities are going to be exclusive and then offload the complete part of this someplace else. But that's something that, you know, it's going to require the council to be willing to do that. So is there any legislative fix to overrule this planning board? I suppose if we change the charter, because I think it's in the charter, and you gave the executive to overrule votes of the council on planning issues, that would do it, but we don't have that right now. I can't veto anything. It's hard enough getting them to even give us the requisite time to respond to plans. We've been in situations where there's a clock in which the executive has to get its comments in to the council, and they've begun meetings before having our input, even though we're within the time we're supposed to be allotted. So it's not easy to do it. We did racial equity studies on the master plan at Tacoma Park, and neither the council nor the planning board would consider the work we did hiring somebody to do a racial equity analysis. And in Tacoma Park, I live in the neighborhood that was affected by this rezoning, and it is like one of the most diverse communities in the county. 80% of the people who live there are tenants. The vast majority of them are low-income tenants. The house I built in Tacoma Park backs up to multi-story apartment buildings behind my house. I mean, so I know where I live, and I know, you know, who lives there. And on one block, there were three unit apartment buildings. Park and Planning, which tells you we want, you know, 2, 3, 4 unit buildings in the neighborhoods, they upzoned those parcels. They upzoned parcels that had 8 apartment units in them and 6 apartment units in them. This is in a residential neighborhood, which is already fully adjusted to everybody living with each other and having this mix of housing. And Park and Planning says not enough there, we're going to even put in more. And it totally violates the notion of what Thrive was supposed to be, which is housing that's compatible with the size and with the adjoining neighbors. We had 3 unit apartment buildings that looked like tall houses. The kind of thing Park and Planning likes to say they like. When they had the chance to say, we're not changing this, they voted to change it. And so did the council. So you should take that as, you know, kind of like a understanding what the situation is that you're going to be dealing with. But there are some things we can do in affordability. We'll be looking at increasing the level of affordability and requiring a broader range of affordable units. There is a real problem. You can call it missing middle, and there are different names for it, but there are a lot of young professionals who don't make a lot of money, whose incomes are, you know, below $100,000, maybe closer to 70 and 80. And they could do fine, but they can't find housing in the county that would allow them to live in it. They can't afford Bethesda. They can't afford, you know, any of the places that are really new high rises. So if what we're going to build is new high rises, we're excluding a whole range of people who don't have the opportunities to live there. They also, Bethesda is another good example of a bad example. It's primarily 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom units. So there aren't going to be any families in there. So much for a walkable, livable community for a lifetime, because as soon as you have kids, you can't stay in your small apartment. And so families are going to be forced out of there. So in a complete community situation, you'd have to provide prices and a mix of housing types, so people at different points of their life, at different incomes, with different families, could afford to stay in the community and not all get pushed out. So it's only people who are single or rent a 2-bedroom, whether it's for themselves or for a partner. It's just not right the way we're doing things. So we'll have a series of recommendations. If people have suggestions, we're open to taking suggestions. So do you want to get into some of the other questions that were asked?
Liz. So someone has raised that the town of Chevy Chase has new units that are being sold at $1,000 a square foot. Very few people would consider this attainable. What can the county do to ensure that any zoning law changes create housing at more accessible price points?
That's with the council. And, you know, like I said, we'll send over complete communities, which is going to require that you have to provide stuff affordable, even this stuff. I mean, imagine if people do all duplexes, triplexes, and quads, and none of them has a requirement for any affordable units. And that appears to be perfectly fine with the planning board. I mean, I guess you got to ask yourself, what are we building here? And who are we building it for? And certainly not about affordability. You know, they used to talk about affordability with Thrive and initially with this, but I think the veneer came off that pretty quickly. There's nothing affordable about what they're planning.
Someone's asked what you think the underlying motivation is in this, if rezoning is not needed to address housing needs. Why are they doing it, do you think?
Well, a couple of things. One, there are some housing providers whose housing type is the townhouse. or various versions of a townhouse. And that's most of what they do. And the green fields, the big green fields, are going away. I mean, Montgomery County is pretty, a lot of it is built out. A lot of it doesn't have sewer and water, which are extraordinarily expensive to put in, like the ag zone, some's agricultural. So we've got limits in the amount of space. So your neighborhood is the next green field. If you can go in and gobble up, a house for $1 million or $1.5 million, you got 750,000 in land costs, and you build a $2 million townhouse. There's an example of one in, I think it's in Bethesda, and I think they sold it for less than, hold on, I'm getting it handed to me. So 4,500 Wall Street, 1967 house. It was sold to a developer for $1.6 million. It was torn down and replaced with 3 townhouses and street parking, lots of impervious surface. Each of the new townhouses is listed for sale at $3.65 million. Pretty good. $1.6 million investment in the land, over $10 million, to play with and to build the units with and make plenty of profit. That's, I think, what you're going to look at. And that's what you're going to see in upper end neighborhoods. They will build very, very expensive housing because they're going to want the housing to match the prices of the houses in the neighborhood. There's a smaller example in Silver Spring where we had a police station, and this developer did a really nice affordable complex. It's for artists. And he got permission to build townhouses. And in this case, it bothered me a lot less because he had decent affordability in what he was doing. But their townhouses are stacked they're lined up as 3plexes. Those townhouses are about $900,000. They're higher than the average price of a house in the neighborhood, which is what Park and Planning saw when they did a study of Silver Spring before any of this happened. They wanted to know what would happen if people did duplexes and triplexes, and their study said it would be more expensive than the houses in the neighborhood already there. So I think all this stuff kind of answers who's this for and what they're trying to accomplish. It's very hard to achieve racial diversity when minority populations in this county, if you talk about Black and brown people, have incomes that are half the incomes of white people in the county. So you can be pretty sure of who's going to be able to live in these new places and who's not going to be able to live there unless they've got a lot of money.
Marc, one of the questions that people asked were what unintended consequences if this plan is put into effect. And one example of that is often denied by the council. It is that outside absentee investors will buy the houses. They will, the less expensive houses, they will come in and outbid individuals because they pay cash and they take over houses and sometimes neighborhoods and rent them out. And this doesn't benefit the community necessarily. And needless to say, the potential home buyers. What do you think of that problem?
But we're worried about it because absentee landowners are a big problem. And they're particularly a problem with multifamily housing and lower end housing. They may behave better, though, I hear plenty of complaints from people living in New York in multifamily housing about what kind of care they get on their projects and the landlords there. If they're strictly investors, I'd say as long as a person's able to walk, investors are more cautious about what they do. But if they've got a captured population that can't walk, then they're basically stuck with the rents and the conditions that the landlord's willing to provide them.
Yeah, so
Class has something to do with this.
Yeah, the argument that this is a great way to develop the tax base and the housing base has many questionable results. So this is something that one person wrote, okay, how come the planning board says all these different jurisdictions have tried this and why shouldn't we? Because the planning board didn't put into the AHSI what happened when some of these jurisdictions did that. For example, Minneapolis has the problem that I just referred to. A huge number of absentee landlords buying the less expensive houses. And one of the justifications for for this is that supposedly the less expensive houses will become available to those who can afford fewer, less expensive houses, but not if absentee investors buy them up.
So you make a really good point. This is kind of the Koch brothers prescription. They've been advocates of the rezoning and letting things go to market and then trickle down. So it is a long way to trickle down. If somebody moves out of an apartment that's already, middle class or upper middle class to go to one of these $7,000 3-bedroom units or, $4,500 2-bedroom units, their old units got to fall a long way to get to a price that people are really struggling can afford it. We're talking about, I told you about the $50,000 and the $50,000 incomes. There are a ton of people under $30,000 incomes in Montgomery County. And the projections from COG were that a large number of the population coming here is also going to be low income. So if that's what it looks like, it's hard to say where these people are going to find housing or that housing prices are going to drop that precipitously. But I can't imagine a neighborhood like Bethesda that because there's a triplex where the units are $3 million, that someone's going to drop their single family home to, like say $500,000. It's going to make it more affordable. It's more likely is if I were a neighbor and I were a mercenary, as soon as I saw the first house that was bought get turned into 3 units for $3 million, the price of my land just went up. Because now you can do a calculation of what somebody's doing with your property and what they're going to get. And I think that's what's going to happen. So that's a problem. And I would say some of the comments in here, there are definitely places that are doing things like this. But I will say they're much more likely to be built out places. I've been in Portland. I've been in Minneapolis. These are not places that are of suburban in character where you've got large lots still available. You've got planned development in many places around the county have over 100,000 units planned for development. They don't have that. If you're in Arlington, you don't have it. If you're in Alexandria, you don't have it. So your choices for dealing with density and population growth are different than ours are. And we're not in that place though. And I'm glad we're not in that place, but because that gives us the latitude to make some choices about what we do with affordable housing that we are not going to have to make where the housing supply is even more limited than it is here. I'm not saying you don't have to build. Some people say, well, you don't want to build the 10,000 units. We're on track to build all the units we're projected to build. I have no problem doing that, but I'm not going to feel great because none of the number of affordable units don't match the required affordability because I don't have the tools. I can't make a developer give me 50% of their units as affordable. It's just, we don't have the power to do that. So yeah, there are examples of it, but we're not a city. And I think all the examples, what do I have here? Charlotte, Durham, Charlottesville, Decatur, Arlington, Virginia. All these are cities. And cities by definition, they're built out constrained. They've been around, over 100 years for the most part as cities.
There's a question here about why you think that the stuff that's in the pipeline is not getting built. What are the impediments to building what's already approved in the pipeline?
Well, the developers in White Flint answered it. They said the rents aren't high enough. They cannot get the rents they want to build the high rises that they have permission to build. It's the same reason with the person who wants to switch from 3 tall buildings to the smaller buildings. He could build 1 tall building, but then the other 2 spots are going to sit vacant until there's a market to absorb the next several hundred tenants you would put in the next building. So there are people who are making a decision to say, I'm not going to wait, I'll go ahead and build now. Easier for a person who owned the land before the rezoning. But if you're a developer who bought the land after we rezoned it, like in White Flint, and we rezoned, 2-story commercial buildings to, enormous buildings. If you paid the price of land that goes with an enormous building, it may be hard to swallow building a 7 or 8 story building that's affordable to a wider range of people, because you're not going to get the rents to support the building. This is where I think the obsession with high rise has been a huge problem. It's making affordability in this county worse, not better. And just providing units that are stunningly expensive doesn't do anything to change what's on, what are the needs of people who in the county who need housing and what their incomes are. Unless your plan is to get rid of those people. And we've dealt with that. In Bethesda, we had major housing approvals that Park and Planning gave developers where they would have had multiple the number of units that were in existing apartment buildings. And the number of units they were going to get after those apartment buildings were built was less than they were there today. So for all this massive density we were giving people, we didn't even bother to exact a replacement of the units they're going to tear down. And if HSC hadn't stepped in and bought a number of those most vulnerable buildings, we would have been in serious trouble. The bad thing of that is HSC had to pay more for those buildings because now those buildings came with a much higher zoning on them, which increased the price of the apartment units. If it hadn't been up soon, the price of those units would have been less.
Someone wants to know what is being done to encourage investment by businesses besides government and biotech. You've done some great work with biotech, but you probably know what the other avenues that are being explored are.
Well, we're looking to diversify. I mean, one of our lessons is that we were dependent on the federal government for a very, very long time. I dare say that when Metro was built to deal with white flight from the district to get everybody who had DC jobs out into the suburbs, and we shouldn't be confused about this. It wasn't built to serve Montgomery County as a county. It was built to serve workers who worked in the federal city and had to get downtown now. It was a very, very, very different situation than where we are now. I feel that we've got some tough choices to make in how we're going to deal with affordability and how we're going to deal with jobs. But we learned out of all that you can't rely on one industry. So we know we can make big steps in biotech. We're number 3 biotech area in the country, but we need to diversify. So we're looking at light manufacturing. We've been talking to companies that we're not looking at building, a steel mill or anything radical like that here, but we are looking to get to additive manufacturing and light manufacturing and things that are compatible with the spaces that we have. We're looking at AI, the University of Maryland's Institute for Health Computing, which is bringing AI to bear on medical research. The AI can also be used to work with companies who are in cybersecurity and other businesses that rely on AI. So we're trying to diversify the economy so that we're not solely dependent on one thing. And hopefully we'll be successful at that.
I think we have time for one more question, and we have one here asking how we can work with the county executive's office to continue to get the word out to groups and communities about this proposal.
So you can contact me, you can contact Debbie Spielberg, debbie.spielberg at montgomerycountymd.gov. And also Marc.Elrich at montgomerycountymd.gov. So that's easy way to that'd be an easy way to get a hold of us here. We've met with community groups. We'll continue to meet with community groups. We've been down this road before. So we're not, unfamiliar with this. And it's a shame because we've got enough work to do just to build the housing that we've got in our master plans. And it would be really good if we built it out the way it was planned. So you had 20 or 23 communities that had a mix of, jobs and housing and, opportunities for people. Throwing all that planning out for this, which has neither the breadth or ability to deal with this, is really, really unfortunate. So it's problematic for us.
Okay, it's 8:15 now, and I understand that we have two more speakers ready to speak. I want to thank you, County Executive, for all of this information. It was extremely helpful to us.
I want to say something really quickly. There's
Okay.
a comment in there I got to reply to.
Okay,
The person says, I'm wary of any executive who says, give me more power and I'll fix it. I haven't asked for any power. The only thing we wanted out of any of this when we tried to get some reforms to the planning board was to let the executive have one appointment out of five appointments on the planning board. It's hardly a power play. It would hardly give me control of anything. And I'm not interested in control of anything. I'm interested in citizen planning board, where we put citizens on the board who actually want to listen to people and do their job. It's worked in Montgomery County for a long time. When we started getting away from citizens, when I was on the council, putting a citizen activist on the council was not something people liked, but putting a developer on the council was something people had no problem with. So we need to get back to something a little bit more, I think, sensible.
okay.
And the last thing I'll say is there's a comment in there about the ballot question. I do plan on running again. If the ballot question doesn't pass, there's a lot of work to do here still. I'd like to be there to do it with you.
That would be great. All right, well, thank you for giving us so much time and information. It's been extremely helpful, and I'm sure people will be in touch with your office as this
Yeah.
moves along, wanting to work on this with you some more.
Thank you.
If it's okay, we should move on now to our next speaker, Michele Rosenfeld. Ms. Rosenfeld's a real property land use and zoning lawyer based in Rockville. She routinely appears before local planning and zoning agencies and litigates at the trial and appellate levels. She's one of the few land use attorneys in the county who represents neighborhoods and individuals. She helped defeat the proposed Costco gas station in Wheaton, and more recently in Frederick County, represented communities who defeated a truck stop and a hot asphalt plant in their neighborhoods. Before entering private practice, she spent 10 years as a lead attorney for the Montgomery County Planning Board, and prior to that time, she was an attorney with the National Association of Home Builders, advising developers nationwide on project-specific land use, zoning, and liability issues. Her broad experience makes her one of the top experts in the legal issues with regard to planning and development in the county. Thank you for being here, Ms. Rosenfeld. The floor is open to you now.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very gracious introduction. And I am very happy to see as many people online and interested and engaged in this issue as have joined tonight. And I'd like to echo something that County Executive Elrich said in his comments, which is that this these zoning changes really do work a fundamental change to the way that zoning is being approached and will be managed across the county going forward. And I'll talk about that both in terms of some of the substance of what's being done, as well as the process of how these changes will be put into place once the zoning amendments are adopted, if they are adopted. And before I get there, I do want to note that the clip that you saw from the planning board representative scolding the developer for working with the community, coincidentally was a case that I worked on. I represented a large multi-building condominium association next door to a proposed apartment complex. We worked closely with the developer. We achieved an increase in the setback from the new apartment building to the condominium buildings and a modest reduction in height. We worked very collaboratively on a pocket park, on adding additional parking for things like Verbo and, not Verbo, the Uber and FedEx. And we were very happy to walk in jointly before the planning board and say, this is a project that we all support. And as one who spent a lot of time working with the planning board and watching during a time when community comments and community input was valued, and where projects where community representatives and developers were on the same page was valued. I have to say my head spun to see that exchange. And it really is a reflection of how times have changed. And I think that philosophical change in terms of a lack of interest in community comments is reflected in part in the procedures that I'll talk about a little bit tonight. I'm going to start. I know there's a lot of people here. I don't know how much. I know that a number of the people who are listening tonight are very familiar with what has been presented. I assume that there are some who are not quite as familiar. And so I'm going to give just a very short overview of what's being proposed in this attainable housing policy approach, and then give a little bit of additional information on some of the more nuanced implications that don't jump out when you read the staff reports that both the planning staff and the county council staff have presented. So from 20,000 feet up, what is being proposed is that by right, meaning you can automatically move forward to building permit by right, duplexes, two houses, two residential units will be allowed in all R40, R60, R90, and R200 zoning blocks across the county. That means that if you own, for example, an R90 zone, you can apply for a building permit and get that duplex approved for construction. For something called a multiplex, which up until recently had been called triplex and quads, 3 units and 4 units, they're now being called multiplexes. These also will be allowed by right. You just go straight to building permit in R40, R60, and R90 zones. Then there's something called a priority housing district, which will allow greater densities within a 1 mile buffer of the red line, purple line, and Marc rail stations, and 500 feet from a growth corridor. And that is enlarged to include not only the zones that I've mentioned a moment ago, but the R200 zones as well. So what has changed? You know, for forever, as long as I've been doing this and far beyond before that, the rule of thumb in Montgomery County was that for single family residential housing, you could only have 1 residential unit on a lot, a platted lot, a record plat, with some exceptions, most notably accessible dwelling, accessory dwelling units. This is now going to be changed to say no more than 1 residential structure per site, per building site. So this would allow, for example, 3 townhomes on 1 building site, or it would allow 4 apartments on 1 building site. And so how is that accomplished? If you're already on 1 existing lot, then you can move forward to development. If you need 2 lots, if you decide to assemble 2 existing lots to make that happen, then there would be something called a minor administrative subdivision. Currently, subdivisions generally get notice, some signage. This would be a review that would be reviewed and approved by the planning director. Currently, the planning director does have the authority to approve certain minor subdivisions. If a community is concerned about that, requests a planning board hearing. In my experience, one is typically given. There's no reference in any of the policies that I've seen that would be something that would be available to communities. So that change from 1 single detached house on a lot to a residential structure on a building site is really a fundamental change in approach in the underlying concept of zoning throughout Montgomery County. So among all of those lots, there's different kinds of lots, right? Some meet the zoning standards, some are bigger than the minimum zoning standards. Some have been approved as part of a development approval that says this is your max density for this particular project. And other developments are subject to homeowners associations. So what are some of the implications for those types of lots? If you are on an undersized lot, let's say you're in the R60 zone, the minimum lot size is 6,000 square feet. If you are grandfathered, if your lot is old enough, you still are eligible by right to build a duplex, for example. So there are an enormous number of undersized lots in the county. A lot of them are down county. Smaller lots are 60 or 90. There's a significant percentage of them that are in the R200 zone. And the reason, and the RE1 zones in some of these larger zones. And the reason for that is because there's the option for cluster development, which means you can leave a portion of the development open for green space, and then you make the lots smaller. In some cases, as small as 6,000 or 7,000 square feet. Those undersized lots in those cluster developments also are eligible for these other types of for the duplex or the multiplex. With respect to properties that are subject to homeowners association regulations, that has been referenced in the staff reports. They acknowledge that there are homeowner regulations that may restrict or prohibit these types of units that are being authorized under the zoning code. There is a recommendation from planning staff that's been endorsed by the county council staff that they look at ways to modify or rescind those types of restrictions. That is not unheard of. For example, many homeowners associations prohibit the regulations under the HOA governing documents prohibit solar panels. State legislation was adopted to say you can't do that. You might be able to, homeowners association can limit the location and the look, but they cannot prohibit solar panels. It's clear to me that it's only a matter of time before there's going to be an effort to try and do something similar, whether that's through county law or state law, but some way to get around those homeowners association limitations. One of the biggest concerns with all of this, just from a community perspective, is the fact that so much of this will be done without public hearing, without public comment. Like I said, the duplexes in almost every zone that's going to be affected are by right. The same thing with the multiplex in a number of the zones. You simply go straight to building permit. For those areas where a developer decides to assemble several properties so that they can build a larger residential structure, they would be able to go through an administrative subdivision review process. And even for those small apartments up to 19 units, in many cases that requires a site plan. That site plan again would be subject only to planning director review. It would not be the type of site plan that goes for planning board review and approval. There were a couple of topics as well that had been raised as questions. One was, is there does historic preservation offer any protection? And by that, if you live in a house that is a protected historic resource, you're designated as a historic resource, and one of these higher density projects is proposed next to you or across the street from you, your historic preservation designation does not give any protection for what happens across the street or next door. It does govern what you can do to the exterior of your structure, but it doesn't give you any protection by way of an ability to limit what might happen next door. And another topic that's come up as well is the question of accessory dwelling units. I have not seen this directly addressed in any of the planning staff or county council staff materials that I've reviewed. In looking at the zoning changes that are being proposed and the zoning codes that are in effect now, I think that for smaller properties, that's going to be very difficult to achieve because a standalone accessory dwelling unit has to meet minimum setback and lot coverage requirements. And given the amount of lot coverage that would be required to build these structures on smaller lots, there simply is not going to be enough room left over. I can see scenarios under what's proposed in conjunction with current zoning standards. If, for example, you have a larger lot, a half acre, an acre, would it be possible to have, to at least design a project that would include a duplex or a triplex or a quad that has room for a standalone accessory dwelling unit or 2 or 3? To me, that seems theoretically absolutely possible. So I don't see anything in the recommendations that would preclude that from happening. And frankly, I suspect, if asked, that the people who are supporting this initiative would say, that's great. The more the better. So I really wanted to sort of give you both a high level perspective, some of the more nuanced implications, and highlight for you my concern just with the approach, which really does truncate, if not eliminate entirely, community input. You've got a lot of neighbors out there who have no idea this is going on, who have no clue that if this zoning text amendment is adopted, if these series of subdivision and zoning text amendments are approved, that they are going to wake up one day and not have any idea why a duplex or a multiplex or a small apartment building is being built next to them. And to County Executive Elrich's comment about master plans, there was a time when I think a fundamental change like this would have gone through some sort of comprehensive master plan review process, where I think there would have been significantly more public input. To do this all through a zoning text amendment is not only a fundamental change to how zoning will be approached in this county, but how it's being implemented. So that's sort of my my high level summary, and I'll be happy to open it up to questions if anybody has any.
I see a question here whether a referendum or a ballot initiative of some is a viable option to oppose this.
I don't believe zoning text amendments are subject to referendum, and maybe County Executive Elrich knows the answer to that for sure.
That answer I don't know, but we can get an answer for
Right.
it. She says it is true.
Yes.
Apparently it is true.
Yeah. I've looked at it, but it was a number of years ago. So no, it's one of the rare pieces of legislation that is not subject to referendum.
There also have been questions about what legal challenge avenues might be available to challenge this should planning and council proceed with this as they seem to be going now.
If there are procedural errors in the way that the legislation is adopted, then you can challenge the validity of the amendments based on the fact that they were not validly approved. As to the substance of what's being adopted, legislation generally, this type of legislation is looked at with a very low threshold by the courts. It's called a rational basis. They're going to look to see if there is any rational basis for whether or not, for why the law was adopted. And the courts will go so far as to say, even if every explanation that the legislative body offered is wackadoo, if we, the court, can think of a rational basis, then we will presume that there was some rational basis behind this. To try and challenge this on the merits would be extremely difficult.
So we have a political question here, which is who are the elected people responsible for this situation? Please name them. So I don't think Michele can answer that, and I don't know, Marc, do you want to answer that or?
Well, they're not guilty yet because they haven't passed anything,
Right,
but they did pass Thrive,
right,
which was the precursor of this.
yeah. And a little
This was
bit,
supposed to come with Thrive originally. But they wanted to be able to say they weren't planning on getting rid of single family housing. So they separated it and agreed they'd do it the next year. So that was a conscious decision because at one point they bragged about it. They were going to do Thrive and this at the same time. And then they realized politically that not a really smart thing to do in an election year.
there's a question here that says, is there any legal issue to adopt this initiative by only ZTA?
There is not. The county can modify any of these zones by changing the standards that apply to the given zones. So while I think it's an extraordinarily novel approach for this county to make this type of really broad brush change in how zoning is approached, for residential properties, as well as the procedures that are used to get to building permit and through these truncated subdivision and site plan review procedures. There's nothing that is legally flawed from a court would look at this and say, this is a valid process.
So we have another.
Regrettably, believe me, that's not the answer I want to give you.
Yeah.
But I believe it is.
Along the same lines, hard to accept that answer, but we have someone saying would like more information about how to challenge the findings in the administrative process. There must be attorneys who are familiar with the manner in which decisions are supposed to be made at any appeal process. And who are the attorneys who challenge zoning decisions? There are often mistakes that are made in administrative processes that can gum up the works.
Well, the standard for an administrative challenge is generally one that's based on the arguments and the evidence that's in the record. And the court will look to see if there's substantial evidence in the record to support the decision that was made. It's not a particularly easy challenge because the courts will presume that the agency made the right decision, but agencies make mistakes. Sometimes they make an error of law. Sometimes they rely on erroneous facts. Sometimes they make facts up that just really aren't reflected in the record. So there is a way to challenge an administrative decision. There are very few attorneys in the county who take on those cases. Most land use and zoning attorneys in the county represent developers. I do take those cases. There's one or two others that also will handle them, but it's rare. It's hard to find.
We have some hands up. Let me see. Quint, you can unmute yourself now, I think.
Quite reminded of Cloverly Civic Association. I don't know if you can answer this question, but with this housing ZTA, would that trump special protection area provisions?
I think, it's interesting you asked that. I actually was thinking about that with respect to the Upper Rock Creek special protection area. I don't see anything in the code that would waive special protection area restrictions. So as it's currently written, I believe that you would be bound by the impervious limitations that are imposed by any special protection overlay zone.
I think that's the key one is that what I'm thinking of the Paint Branch special protection area.
Absolutely.
Imperviousness is protected and that could just completely ruin the special protection area if we were allowed to build with higher density.
Correct. And I don't think that I think that the densities that are allowed would not change, but I think what you could actually achieve would be limited by the impervious cap in that special protection area.
And I have another question about People's Council. Could citizens create their own council, People's Council? What would be the limitations of that if we just said, okay, let's collect a few $1 million and let's encourage some bright lawyers to come in and help you out?
There is no limitation on that. As as a private organization, you could raise funds and you could retain as many attorneys as you wanted to help with zoning concerns, zoning issues, hire lobbyists. So there's no prohibition on that whatsoever.
So you'd support that?
I would. Call me.
We might do that.
Okay.
Barbara Sosnick, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This is a little bit, I put something in the chat also, but I'll just say a couple of things. One, there should be some thought given, not just to, organizing, strength in numbers, but getting petitions and getting the media involved in this. And I am an attorney. This is not my area of law. I'm a family law attorney, but occasionally the courts, they do the right thing, even when it's an arbitrary and capricious standard, or no rational basis. And again, in terms of the merits, I hear what you say. This is your area of law. It sounds like they're extremely deferential. Chevron doesn't apply, that Supreme Court decision, in this realm. But one would like to hope that if it actually got to the point that they're having to decide in a litigation, when especially, let's say there were we're able to get hundreds of thousands of people either on a petition or with some help from maybe Mr. Elrich, his office, and other influential opponents, to show the extent, because they are swayed by public opinion to some degree. But also in terms of the compatibility issue with the neighborhood, I don't understand how anyone who is halfway intelligent could ever find that, whatever you call them, multiplexes. I live in Woodside, single family residential neighborhood. There are some townhouses, but that's a single family. And how in the world multiplexes, with multiple units, how in the world could that be compatible? Georgia Avenue is already a nightmare in terms of the density, in terms of the traffic, the parking. Where are these people going to park? I guess there's no thought given to the people who already live in the neighborhood, some of whom don't have driveways. And where are they going to park? It seems to me that they want to turn, they meaning the pro-development crowd, they want to turn this into little, like DuPont Circle. People know where that, and I say that because that's a nice neighborhood, actually. It's an affluent area, but guess what you can't do there? You can't park. In many of the neighborhoods in DC, the schools are already overcrowded. I don't know if Woodland still has trailers. Where are I assume that there'll be some kids coming in. Where are the kids going to go to school? So can you answer the question of how in the world it meets any of those standards for compatibility with the neighborhood?
Well, and I can tell you how I think a court would look at it. And the court is going to presume that the county council is acting in public health, in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. And historically, zoning standards have been viewed as the way that you measure whether or not something is compatible in any given location. So the court, unless we can demonstrate something like there is a true nuisance in sort of a historic tort kind of way, or some public safety concern that really rises above the goals that they say they're trying to achieve, the court is, it's hard to overstate how deferential the court will be to the legislative actions. I've even seen cases where people have alleged that the legislature was acting with ill motives. And the court said, look, you know, maybe they were, but as long as it looks on its face like it's a legitimate legislative action, we're not going to get behind the motive of the legislature. So I really don't like to be so pessimistic, but I am trying to be very candid with you as to how difficult it is to overturn local legislation, unless for some reason it was improperly adopted. And when it comes to petitions and lobbying efforts, that needs to be directed at the county council members who are acting or considering this pending legislation. The courts will not be swayed by how many people show up in the courtroom as a general rule. They're going to look at what the legal standards are, especially when you get to the appellate level. So that those efforts, those coordinated petitions, letters, phone calls, meetings to try and get this modified somehow or disapproved is that effort has to be directed at the county council, squarely at the county council.
Carrie Lamari, go ahead.
Okay, Michele, how are you doing today? It's good
I'm
to
doing
see
well,
you.
Carrie. How are you?
I'm good. Listen, I read a fascinating report that was written by Royce Hanson recently. Was sent to me by Daniel Mayer. He's in the chat room. And in that report, Royce explains with multiplex housing, it's extremely problematic to initiate or create zoning changes for multiplex housing in zoning text amendments. And the reason why he says it is he cites two things. The first thing he cites is the 14th Amendment, where equal application of the law, meaning that if you're going to change it, the R200 zone in a jurisdiction, it has to be across the jurisdiction. Okay, so you're gonna have to allow the multiplex in every part of the jurisdiction. You can't just target it at a specific area. And secondly, he talks about Section 3 of the Department of Commerce's state's standards for planning and zoning. And that states that, my understanding is that it states that the actions of the jurisdictions must be for the health, safety, and welfare, which is what you just said, of the jurisdictions. But they go on to explain that health, safety, and welfare of the public mean traffic congestion. It means the environment. It means our schools. It means water, both quantity and quality, meaning, you know, our drinking water as well as our stormwater. And by applying it the way through a zoning text amendment, before you develop the actual infrastructure, you're not working within the health, safety, and welfare of the public. You're actually working against it. So wouldn't that be the way to approach attacking a ZTA for multiplex housing? Now you're the lawyer.
Even within specific zones, there are numerous examples in the county where there are different standards applied. Sometimes it's through special protection areas. Sometimes it's by allowing optional method development in certain parts of a zone, but not others. Sometimes it's because a master plan recommendation allows it. As a general rule, I do agree that it needs to be applied equally across zones, and there's actually state law that provides for that as well. I am not familiar with the Section 3 Department of Commerce standards, and I'd be interested to see what you have from Royce. I'm not sure how that applies to local county zoning legislation. I've never heard of that as as legal authority that's somehow binding on what the county council does, but I'm happy to be educated about it. So I'd like to see it. And again, I go back to the basic premise, which is that the courts are going to presume that the county council is acting in the public interest. They, often face situations where people see the same issue very, very differently. And we've heard compelling information from County Executive Elrich about how this really is just not a good idea. It's not going to achieve what we hope to achieve. And in fact, probably is counterproductive to it. But reasonable minds can differ. And the court is going to likely say reasonable minds can differ, and we're not going to second guess the people who decided that this was in the public interest for health, safety, welfare. So again, I really don't like to be in a position where I'm so pessimistic, but I also feel responsible to be very candid with you about how difficult I think a legal challenge would be. Now, the day after they adopt the law, we may read it and go, holy cow, based on what they did, they really blew it, and we have a legal challenge. So I'm not ruling out the possibility that may happen, but if they do this properly, it would be difficult to challenge.
We have several people still in the chat demanding names. And it reminded me of something, maybe Marc can comment on this. I heard that at the Aspen Hill Civic Association, you talked about how the council is now doing a lot of their work behind the scenes and not openly discussing things out in the open at the council anymore. So it really is kind of difficult to tell where exactly council members are on this. But Marc, if you're still on, maybe you can comment on that. I'd also, for the lawyers or Marc, I don't care, some viewpoint about whether or not there is any credible case for but the law that requires you to do your business out in public. I'm forgetting the name of it, but anyway.
The Open Meetings Act.
Yeah, the Open
Sure.
Meetings Act. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Well, go ahead, Marc.
My frustration was with this last budget episode where, the council had approved things in committee, pretty much all these expenditures. And then council as a whole said, was very supportive and voted unanimously to put everything on list. And then the following week, the council members had their staff meet and direct cuts to the budget, which nobody saw. So the list that people saw going in there and the list of things approved, nobody knows who voted to cut them and who didn't vote to cut them. And it created a situation where you could publicly say, yeah, I supported it. And then nobody would know who took which vote on it, which I found really, really problematic. It's hard to do business that way. And the budget's a really important document. And when residents do think, I can't tell me how many nonprofits came up to me and said, I thought we had our funding. Everything was good. Everybody said good things. I said, that's right. And then it didn't. So it's disappointing. I mean, they can't meet secretly as a group.
Mm-hmm.
There's limits on the number of council members who can meet together.
But don't they have their staff kind of running to bring back?
But the staff can do stuff, which is what they did in this case. They were on cell phones. They knew how to vote on particular things, but the council members weren't in the room, so technically no foul.
Yeah, the Open Meetings Act prohibits a quorum from meeting without it either being advertised as for example, a closed session for legal advice of counsel or some sort of executive session. But the staff doesn't have that limitation. And, if 2 or 3 meet and then 2 or 3 different ones meet, it's not that difficult, I think, to circumvent that quorum prohibition. One tool that is available to you would be to to request documents under Maryland's Public Information Act. And that would include emails, that would include, theoretically text messages, although I've never seen those actually produced, but it can give you some insight into what's happening. The challenge is that's often after the fact. But it is one way to at least try to get some information into what was going on behind the scenes.
So we have a question, earliest time development would start if this is approved. The planning director has said he wants this approved by the end of the year because there are developers ready to build in early 2025. And then this is for Michele. To which court does an appeal go in Montgomery County, the circuit or the appellate court? And is there a potential federal issue to send an appeal to federal court?
It would go to state court. Unless we have a federal constitutional violation, some sort of a takings claim, for example, or a Section 1983 civil rights violation claim, we really would not be able to get into court. Even if we have federal claims, if they're tied as well to state claims, it's likely going to be sent back to the state court for a ruling on the state court issues first. The federal courts hate land use issues. They just really, really don't like them. They'll try to dodge them any chance they get. If this is adopted in the near term, depending on how long it takes for the legislation to take effect, 30, 60, 90 days, I think emergency legislation could be as early as 10, perhaps. Then it would take as long as it would take a developer to submit a building permit application for many of these zones and get it approved, which would be a matter of weeks, perhaps a couple of months.
So Gordy has a question about the growth in infrastructure hearing that's coming up, and can it be that bill be challenged if passed without a good economic impact statement or a racial equity and social justice study? I don't know if you want to answer that, if we want to save that for Glenn.
I think we should save that one for Glenn.
Okay. If it goes to the circuit
I have
court.
a hand raised somewhere in.
Oh, Matt Passanelli has his hand raised. Okay, hang on, Matt. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Matt. Go ahead. Matt, you have to unmute yourself.
Hi, folks. I don't know if this is going to work. I'm having
We
trouble
can
with
hear you
my,
now. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thanks. First of all, thanks for the time and your thoughts on this. I was wondering a specific question. I'm wondering if you were tracking what was happening in Arlington County with the pending litigation again over their swift passage of a similar objective. In one instance, but by way of example, as I understand it, they are some of the items that they are using in this argument is that there were never any impact studies completed for things like transportation and infrastructure and so forth that would typically be completed for major zoning changes. My sense is, my understanding is that Montgomery County has none of those, and has responded by effectively saying they don't. Two things. One, that they think that the impact will be quote unquote de minimis, and number two, that they have the impact tax built into this, to these goals. So I'll pause there.
Sure. I have not been following that litigation in particular. I'd be curious to read what they're alleging. I can tell you that I did challenge the county council's adoption of a master plan in Bethesda, and two of our arguments were statutory, that the planning board failed to conduct an environmental, a climate change assessment, essentially a carbon impact assessment that was required by county law, and one other assessment that was required by county law. And it went up on appeal. We lost at the trial court level. We lost at the appellate level, with the court ruling that because the statute did not provide for a penalty, it did not say that there would be any consequences like revocation of the master plan, that it was just more like a recommendation than a requirement. So that might give you a little bit of sense of how difficult it can be to challenge some of these things. It was the Westbard master plan. Is everybody depressed yet?
I think, yes.
I'm sorry.
All right, Barbara, I'm gonna let you
That was
ask-
not my goal.
No, I'm kidding. Barbara, I'm gonna let you ask one more question and then we have to move on to the
Okay.
next speaker.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. So I'm curious, it's not clear from your answer before whether if this goes to the circuit court. And if it goes to the circuit court, as you know, there's many judges on the circuit court and they're all different. And, you know, in my practice, it can be really a crap, and I know it's a different practice, but it can be a crapshoot in terms of who you get as a judge. And sometimes the judges make wrong decisions, not based on the law, and they can be all over the place in what they're ruling on. And so the question is, have all of these judges, or I guess you would have no way of knowing whether how many of these judges who are presently sitting have actually ruled on zoning issues to be able to assess, you know, what their views are. And so I hear what you're saying. For a lot of reasons, it's uphill and then it gets to the Court of Appeals. But if somehow you got lucky with a circuit court trial judge and were to prevail, it takes a long time to go up on appeal. So at least you get some years.
Sure, it does. It does take time, and you can. The number of judges with zoning experience or background on the circuit court level are pretty few and far between. It's not like, you know, breach of contract or med malpractice or something, slip and fall. It's not a kind of case that they typically would get. There are a couple there who do have real estate and zoning background, but it's a slim few. Once you get to the appellate level, there are a number of judges with considerable background and interest in land use and zoning. So in my experience, every time I've gone up to the appellate court, which is quite a few times at both levels at this juncture, there is invariably at least one and often two judges who really know what they're doing when it comes to land use and zoning. So if you get to that level, you're pretty certain to get judges who know what they're doing.
Okay, Zoom in wants to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just a thought, what's the possibility of jurisdictions being asking to be incorporated into cities in order to be able to bypass the county's ETAs?
There is a provision in county law that allows neighborhoods, communities to try and become incorporated as a municipality. I think in my memory, it's only been tried once. It's extremely difficult to do. And I'm not aware of any locale in 30 years that's been successful. I don't know, Marc, you may have a memory of one of them, but I don't think that anybody has been successful with that effort.
I remember the one that wasn't, but I also knew why they didn't succeed. I don't think it's impossible. There's just a reluctance of the county because we have to, if there's a new municipality, we have to give up a portion of the income tax
Exactly.
we collect. But it also means the municipality can't have a shadow purpose. You actually have to operate things that require money, like take care of parks or build a rec center or things like that. You just can't declare yourself a city, then have no services and expect to get the money.
Someone has asked whether an injunction would at least, how hard is it to get an injunction and buy some time while it's litigated?
You have to show several factors. One of them is you have to show likelihood of success on the merits. So again, it really is going to depend on what the final text of any legislation looks like as to whether or not we think we have an opportunity to try and stop the law from going into effect through an injunction. And really, until we see what that final language looks like, you know, it's really difficult to say.
Someone said, do you have next steps to recommend for people who are concerned?
Talk to your council members. Get everybody you know to talk to your council members. Really, honestly, at this point, it's a question of trying to persuade them that they need to do something different. And, you know, it runs the gamut from don't do anything, which I think is probably unrealistic, to do something a little modified, you know, something less impactful, how to scale it back, just less of what you've proposed. And then the other would be to try and get some notice, some public hearing, some community input opportunities as these projects go through the development process. Because right now, given how many of them can just go straight to building permit without anybody knowing anything about it, it really, I think in many ways is very unfair to the existing communities, to people who bought based on master plans, who bought based on your current zoning, who bought based on the development approvals, you know, your HOA regulations. It just, there's the number of people who are going to wake up and realize that the ground has truly shifted under them in terms of what they expected of the community where they bought is really staggering. It's the council. That's your pivot point right now.
Someone's asking about the process of a neighborhood becoming an HOA.
You would need everybody who would be part of that HOA to agree to be part of it. You would need articles of incorporation and bylaws. It's not a particularly difficult thing to do. And I'm happy to refer you to attorneys who do HOA work who could help you with that.
Doesn't this trump the HOA?
Not yet. They're suggesting they're looking for ways to do that, but at the moment it doesn't seem as if they have a method in place to achieve it. I think it would take some sort of legislative effort, and I think it may have to be on the state level.
Interesting.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for your time.
Thank
you
you.
were terrific, and you can tell by the number of questions, people are really interested in what you have to say, but we do have Glenn Orlin here waiting.
Absolutely.
Getting late, so thank you so much for your time tonight. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it. I learned a lot. And we are going to look for Glenn Orlin now. Hopefully he did not abandon us. Glenn, are you here?
I am.
Okay, this is our final speaker, Dr. Glenn Orlin, an experienced planner, engineer, and former deputy staff director of the council. Dr. Orlin served the Montgomery County with distinction for 39 years. He began his work in 1985 as chief of the Department of Transportation. He transitioned to the council and then became deputy director in 1995. He had a large portfolio of areas of responsibility, including CIP, school construction, subdivision staging, policy and transportation, projects planning and policy. He's widely regarded as one of the county's top experts on growth and infrastructure. We're lucky to have him here tonight. Thank you so much for coming and for waiting so long.
Problem.
But go ahead.
Thank you. Very interesting listening to all this. And I'll try to keep my comments very brief, given that we're really past the time. First of all, I want to answer one of the last questions that came up. It is possible for an area to become a municipality, but it's not possible for that municipality to have planning and zoning authority unless state laws change. There are only 7 jurisdictions in the county that have planning and zoning. They all predate the Park and Planning Commission. They go back over almost 100 years. And name all 7, give you a gold star. But that's likely not going to happen. So that's not a way of getting around this. I really wanted to talk tonight, but I won't very much, about the growth and infrastructure policy. Somebody mentioned that earlier. It's not the same thing as the attainable housing policy, but there are some relationships between them. And unlike the attainable housing policy, this is coming up right now. The attainable housing policy is and out there are going to be listening sessions, but the council hasn't scheduled, as far as I know, any committee work sessions or council sessions. The growth and infrastructure policy and associated bill, which amend the impact tax law for schools and for transportation, is before the council now. The public hearing on the growth and infrastructure policy is next Tuesday. It's Tuesday afternoon at 1:30. The impact tax bill, this bill 1624, is scheduled for October the 1st. First thing, process-wise, I want to point out, as far back as I can remember, and I go back with the growth policy since it started in 1986, whenever there's been a growth policy, there's been an impact tax set of recommendations from the planning board, and they've come together, which it did this time. It's in the planning board's report. They talk about both. And there's been a joint public hearing on both. That's not happening this year for a reason I haven't been able to figure out yet. So, and I'm going to be setting my comment. First thing I'm going to say is, well, it's too late to change the growth infrastructure policy public hearing for next Tuesday. But what they should do is on October 1st, have that be a joint hearing of both the impact tax bill and a second public hearing on the growth infrastructure policy to take more testimony. They can do that. That's easy. That's easy enough for them to do. Plus, it would give more time for the community to really weigh in on both the impact tax law and the growth infrastructure policy. So keep that in mind. Just a couple things I want to say about the growth infrastructure policy. I have like 3 pages of detailed comments, which are totally inappropriate for this setting because it just takes way too long and probably goes way too far in the weeds. And what I'll do, Cheryl, if it's okay with you, I'll send this to you, and then you can distribute it to the folks who are watching tonight, or however you want to do it is fine, or to Alan, either one. I'll send it to both of you. But nonetheless, basically what's happening here is the growth infrastructure policy is by law updated every 4 years. The planning board did its job by transmitting it to the council and to the executive on by the end of July, by August 1st by law. And the council then, actually this county executive and the Board of Education are supposed to make their comments by September 15th. I talked with Debbie Spielberg. Marc's comments are coming over probably the next few days. I'm not sure if the board sent their comments yet. The council has to act if they're going to adopt a new growth infrastructure policy by November 5th. A really short time frame in terms of legislative action. They only have about a month and a half, 2 months to do this. Basically, what this set of proposals does is continue down the road, which has been happening for a number of years, which is generally to loosen standards, both for schools and for transportation, and to provide more carve-outs for folks not to pay any or all of the impact taxes that have been charged at this point. Both of those, I think, are in the negative direction. And I'll detail that in comments, which hopefully you'll get. As far as, and then I'm going to direct just a few comments about the attainable housing policy, which I really have not followed very closely, except in the last week or so when I've gone back and read a lot of materials. I want to second most of what Marc was saying. Like Councilman, everything Marc said on those points. But what I do want to highlight a couple things. First of all, there's a comment in the planning board's transmittal, which basically says, oh, you know, there's not going to be that many units that are going to go through this process of tearing down a house and putting up triplexes, quadruplexes, even duplexes. It's only a small percentage. Well, it's only a small percentage, it's not going to have much of an impact. But as a large percentage, it has whether it's going to be a small or large, but it can't be both. Secondly, there is the argument made that you want to be able to provide more housing within walkability of transit, or so the transit can be reached. And their definition, I think Michele mentioned this earlier, a lot of the areas, if you're within a flies of a metro station or a Purple Line station or a BRT route, or it's just called a growth corridor, which doesn't have any of the above, but has some bus service, then that's okay for the zones in those areas. Most of the studies that I've seen and I've worked on this issue for many decades, is that the typical walk shed for a rail station, and the Purple Line is a half a mile. And not a half mile as the crow flies, because we're not crows, we're not birds. It's a half mile walk from where you're going to where the metro station is, or where the Purple Line station is. And that typically translates, a half mile is really more like about 3/4 of a mile when you take that into account. BRT, if it's really a high quality BRT, in other words, it's a standard sort of busway, which basically looks like light rail, but it's with buses, that same characteristics as light rail. If it's the BRT that we have so far, not so much, because although there are improvements, you can take the flash bus on 29 and get to your destination more quickly than we treated before. It's not order of magnitude more quickly. And then a lot of these growth corridor areas are ones that don't have really any high quality transit at all. And so to make the argument that we want to provide more density near those kinds of areas is just way beyond reality. Another point is they said within a mile of Marc stations. We have to keep in mind how many trains per hour and how many hours during the day Marc runs compared to Metro or the Purple Line. It's handy, but most Marc stations are maybe 6 or 7 trains a day in each direction. A Metro Rail runs every 5 or 6 minutes all day, and Purple Lines can run at least initially every 8 minutes all day. And so it's apples and oranges. Furthermore, we've always treated Metro as if it's one thing. If you're in a Metro station, you get this particular benefit. Well, it's really more about accessibility by transit. And if you're close to this Friendship Heights or Silver Spring or Bethesda station, the number of jobs or just destinations that you can reach within, say, 45 minutes by train is a lot more than what you can get when you get on the Shady Grove station. Not to say what the cost is. The cost is obviously a lot more expensive for taking the train from there. And we've always treated them as if it's the same. I think that's an error. So I think that's with the expanse of this program. Now I'm saying this as a resident of East Bethesda. I live like a half a block from BCC High School. Even if you reduce this program, the scope of it down to its bare minimum, my neighborhood's still going to be a target. Okay, so I'm not saying this is trying a way of avoiding what happened to my neighborhood personally, because I think we're sort of ground zero for this. But there are lots of areas of the county where this is really not going to result in much in the way of transit use. Remember, most of the people who travel today, after COVID sort of has waned, driving has come back sort of with a vengeance. Transit has not come all the way back, although it's making some gains, and biking is still a minuscule proportion of commuting or traveling in general. The last point I want to make that hasn't been raised so far has to do with the tax base of the county. I guess we still do this. We do what's called a fiscal impact statement for master plans, where we look at, with the additional development that's being proposed in a master plan, how much more revenue would the county be receiving compared to how much additional cost? And routinely, the only type of doesn't cost us are high-rise, senior housing, and, lack of a better term, McMansions. Everything else costs the county more money. So every time you approve more housing, that's not one of those 3 categories, we are placing more and more of a negative fiscal burden on us. And what does that mean? Higher taxes or reduced services or both. Now, obviously, there's some exceptions we as a liberal county want to include in this, which affordable housing, of course. Affordable housing really is a loser in terms of the fiscal impact, but we think it's the right thing to do. But to expand that to units that are not, not affordable, I can't think of a better term. I guess market rate housing. If it's not really high of development that doesn't produce kids, which is the biggest driver of our fiscal situation in the county. In other words, senior housing doesn't generate kids, and high rise to a very limited extent generates kids. Then it's going to cost us more money. So I think I'll just stop at that. Like I said, I can go much more detail on the growth infrastructure policy, but this isn't the right venue for that, as I realize. And I will send this out to the MCCF and and you can distribute however you like, but the time is very short. Again, if you want to testify in this, you need to get contact with the council tomorrow and get on the list of speakers, and put together your testimony really just in the next few days, unless they agree to hold a second hearing on the growth policy, the growth infrastructure policy in October, as I'm suggesting, with the impact tax.
So have you asked for that second hearing? Is someone asking for it?
I will be in my memo tomorrow.
Okay, all right.
But I'm a private citizen. They will pay as much attention to me as they want.
Okay, we have a question here for you. Is there a fiscal impact statement analysis for the Attainable Housing Initiative? Do you know? You're frozen.
Marc is, or Michele, have you seen? I guess they're not there. I don't know if there has been or not, to tell you the truth.
Oh, okay.
I have not seen one, and I didn't know if one was required. I was going to ask you that question myself.
I don't think it's required. It's required for master plans.
Right, right.
That's right. And yeah, I think just master plans.
Okay.
Frankly, I have to add this. It really does depend on how much this, if the policy passes in any form, how much developers are really going to take advantage of it. And I just don't know. Nobody really knows. It could be a lot, which would be huge changes, and could have a very negative, frankly, impact on the fisc for the county, as well as other things that folks have already mentioned. Or it could just be the odd house here and there, which then it really won't have much of an effect. I don't think that wouldn't have an effect on sewer and water. It really wouldn't have much effect on schools. Wouldn't have very much effect on traffic. Remember, we already have ADUs, accessible dwelling units, whereby in most, well, in certain zones, you can have a second dwelling unit on your property. You could double the number of units in your neighborhood now. So no, that hasn't happened a whole lot. There's been some neighborhood, like my street, I think there's one unit that I have 19 houses on my block. There's one house that has one. So we just don't know.
I can't reconcile, the statements about how they're going to drive down the cost of housing and desegregate neighborhoods or whatever. And then on the other hand, say very few people are going to do this. I don't know. I can't reconcile those.
Actually, that wasn't the point I want to make. Thank you for reminding me. I've always been very skeptical of this argument of expanding housing will drive down price of houses. I've been skeptical of the idea that drives up the price of housing. That happened when we've dropped impact tax we've done in the past. I haven't seen a big spike in housing starts. We are in a regional market. It's not a Montgomery County market. It's a regional market. And if we make changes in Montgomery County, that'll maybe have a minor effect on the region. But unless the whole region does what we're talking about doing, I don't see where it's going to have any kind of really major.
I know there's always a lot of concern about school overcrowding. It seems like as long as I've lived in this county, there's been a problem with maybe correctly estimating the number of incoming students. And there's always seems to be trailers and a lot of parent angst. And I heard Marc say today, you're going to have a hard time finding more land down county for schools. So what do you think about the way the planning board calculates housing and for school purposes?
Do a good job, actually. They're always updating the information based on very detailed surveys. I think the planning staff is actually terrific, and they are, nobody should look at them and say, they're evil or anything, or same with the planning board, frankly. They're all just trying to do the best they can, but they've gotten the direction. It started with probably, frankly, Casey Anderson, the last planning board chairman, where he basically pushed the idea that we should have more housing. And actually, this idea goes all the way back to the 90s. And Bill Hussman, whom some of you may remember, was chairman of the planning board. He had been a county chief of the county staff, the county executive staff, back when the first county executive was in office back in the 70s. And what they said was we need more housing because that'll bring down the cost. I've never seen that. I'm very dubious about that idea.
Yeah, it hasn't really worked anywhere in the country. What are your sort of top takes that you're going to ask for in terms of the hearing on the growth and infrastructure policy?
Well, one of the things they talk about on the impact tax is to give credits to developers who make improvements on state roads or state highways. The impact tax since at least 1988 is basically there to collect, the transportation impact tax is there to collect money for their share of county infrastructure. And so back in the day, we actually calculated how much cost there would be to improve the county transportation infrastructure, and then divided that by the remaining development, and that produced the rates that were being charged. If we're now going to say, oh, if you're widening a state road, or if you're adding a turn lane on a state road, or if you're even bikeways on a state road, things which are really the state's responsibility, then we've broken that link between what is being charged and what the money's going for. So frankly, if you're to be honest with what an impact tax is, if you want to give credit for state improvements, then you have to increase the cost basis for the impact tax to include all state improvements, which will raise. So I think there are, frankly, I think that some of the changes in the growth and infrastructure policy have been going too far in the direction of providing more basically incentives, if I'm going to call it that, for development to happen. One thing the planning board is recommending this time, which is a good thing, is the council approved this this thing called this concept. I lost the name of it now. Of desired growth in investment areas, which were basically providing a deep discount in impact taxes. Well, these are the very areas where people want to develop. So we're basically saying, oh, you want to develop here? Oh, you don't have to pay as much impact taxes, or almost none. Then we have opportunity zones, which were created by the state, which are actually going out of business in the next couple of years. It's no longer a concept where we don't charge any impact taxes either. And a lot of these opportunity zones, frankly, ceased being eligible for being opportunity zones years ago. Perfect example is downtown Silver Spring. Downtown Silver Spring was created back in the 90s when things were really pretty desperate there. Maybe it was late 90s, early aughts, but it's stopped being eligible to be an opportunity zone almost 20 years ago. Yet we continue to treat it as if it's an area that's depressed. And so for years and years, all the developments that's been happening in Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring, in terms of housing and commercial development, has not paid any impact tax. And we lost millions of dollars in that. So, you know, and we have this thing, it's a Montgomery County thing, I think, where we're so used to doing policies that apply broadly, and we're so scared to actually make exceptions in particular cases. And so we have a situation like these opportunity zones or desired area, where if you're in the area, you get a discount, regardless of what the development is. So you're building a gas station or a fast food outlet or some other, you know, use which is like, you know, you can have it or not, who cares? They don't pay an impact tax.
Yeah.
Why? Well, instead, you know, maybe with the exception of affordable housing, if up to me, I would get rid of all the exemptions and all the discounts on impact taxes and say that if you have a special case you want to make, like why your development, then we have something called the Economic Development Fund. And if for housing, we have the Housing Initiative Fund. And the county can put its money where its mouth is and say, in this particular development, it's that important to us, we'll put in money to make up the difference on that impact tax. But everything else, why are we giving away these essentially resources? The same thing is raising a tax, really, because that money has to come from somewhere. So and that's not going to happen. That's just a change in thinking. But it would be much clearer, much cleaner policy, frankly, if we trust the executive and the council to make individual decisions on individual developments as they come forward. I mean, this isn't Chicago. You know, this isn't, you know, Tammany Hall, New York. There are, you know, I worked for the county for decades. I trust them to be able to make decisions like that without there being any graft and corruption. I know it's easy to think that that's true from the outside. It doesn't happen, okay? It just doesn't. Just absolve yourself of that. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to watch. You should always watch, because that's what keeps folks sort of honest. And frankly, one of the things that's been negative in the county is the absence of any kind of a media that closely watches these things, like we used to have with the Journal and the Gazette, Post. We don't have that anymore. But as long as folks like the Civic Federation and others are vigilant and keep watching the store, I don't have any doubt that the county would make rational decisions on that score. So I'm sorry I sort of went off on that particular tangent, but that's one I feel pretty strongly about. But again, let me send out the I'll send the report to. It's only 3 pages. I already talked about maybe a third of it.
Okay.
So if anybody has any questions, again, I don't want to keep you away from your late night TV viewing or sleep or whatever it is you want to do.
No, I mean, we still have a pretty good crowd here, and let me take a look and see if there's any more questions.
While you're doing this, I want to, this is wonderful. I'm seeing faces I haven't seen in years. And Kay Stevens, I don't know if you're still on. Kay Stevens worked for the County Department of Transportation up until 1985. I took her job, and I haven't seen her in 40 years.
Oh.
So, hi, Kay. Let's have lunch. We got lots to catch up on. Sorry. Other questions?
Some of these don't look like.
I see Carrie and Zoomin.
Yeah. Can you read it? And just see if you answer it. There's a lot of discussion here about private equity firms buying up single family homes to turn them into rentals, and what effect that will have on the price of single family homes. In Minneapolis, the plan was stopped pretty quickly there, halted by the courts, but when it was in effect, according to the woman who had been the head of the planning board, investors came in and bought up single family homes and outbid first-time home buyers. And there's a lot of discussion here about, can anything be done to try to stop that? I know one idea is to require that one of the units of a plex be owner occupied. That would stop that. But do you have any thoughts on that? It's a little bit outside of what you were asked to come, but you might have some ideas.
Yeah, I really don't. Again, I just don't know how much of an effect this is going to have. It could be a lot, it could be a little. I just don't know.
Yeah.
I do know anybody who lives in or around Bethesda or Silver Spring or Chevy Chase knows a letter every 2 weeks from a developer. And I know it's because he wants to tear it down and build something bigger. And they could for a lot more money. And I suppose with this program, I could make even more money. So in that respect, I would think that, yeah, I mean, I think there's a market out there for that kind of thing.
So raise your hand if you have a question for Dr. Orlin before we finish tonight.
I see Carrie and Zoomin have their hands up.
Okay, I must be missing that somehow. All right. Gary, you can unmute yourself.
How's my friend doing up there in off the river? Is River Living treating you good?
Back and forth. I'm in St. Louis County right now.
Listen, I want to remind you, there actually kind of sort of is a fiscal impact statement on attainable housing. It was in Thrive. Office of Management and Budget gave it to the Fed committee, and you were extremely concerned about it at the time because, I mean, Gwen pointed out that, you know, it's going to be a very expensive plan, especially with 32 complete communities associated with attainable housing, with the needed schools, with the stormwater, the entire list on the action report. You and I talked about that. We're talking about, you know, potentially $6 to $8 billion is what they associated it in Thrive to promote Thrive. And then, of course, $6 billion for a bicycle a master plan. And all of these things are, you know, kind of related to the Attainable Housing Initiative. Well, you know, you can look that
I don't know
way.
about the bike plan, Carrie.
You don't. We talked about that.
Yeah, I was very critical of the bike plan.
I
thought
know
it was
you
much
were,
too aggressive.
but you know, we're talking potentially an additional 384,000 units that they can add in the county. I know that it's, you know, the market dictates it, and we don't know how many are going to go forward. But if you look at the supporting infrastructure and services necessary for the attainable housing, it's a lot of money. And it was all written up, according to Hans Riemer, as a philosophy, if you remember him using that term. I've got a video of it, actually, of you, and you were very cross with all of it. But
Carrie, do you have a question?
well, I
There's
mean, I was hoping
couple
to get
people have questions.
his you know, his explanation or his opinion from that aspect, from the Thrive Planning and Housing meeting, as it relates to attainable housing. We've got a lot of infrastructure costs. How are we going to pay for it? There you go, Glenn.
Well,
Okay, Leanne Tobias has her hand up. Go ahead, Leanne.
Yep, I do. Hi there, Mr. Orlin. Thank you so much for the presentation. My question is, how do neighborhood organizations, in your judgment, best get the attention of the council? I find that it's very, very hard to often get points across. And do you have any insight into that?
well, I think what Michele said is right. I mean, just you have to reach the council members themselves. They're the final decision makers in all of this. And I mean, the planning board's proposal is just that, it's a proposal. And how to, you know, do it. I mean, if the Civic Fed could get together with a consolidated position, that would be very helpful. Look for fellow travelers who might agree with this kind of thing. Individual civic associations are also good, particularly when you're talking about district council members. You know, go to your folks in your district and say, look, this is where we are at. If there are umbrella associations in an area, just get out there and first do your homework and figure out exactly what you want to say. Don't spend too much time in the weeds. And I think something else Michele said, good. Councils don't like to say absolutely no. What they do like to say is, well, okay, we like the idea that too much. Let's reduce the scope of it. Let's do a pilot. Let's maybe restrict the type of housing. Maybe you don't do quads, at least initially. You just do duplexes and triplexes. You know, you basically try to compromise. Councils are really good at compromising, and that's not a negative. That's when you get 11 people together, you're not going to get a single, direction. This is what we're going to do. There's going to be compromises just to get enough agreement to pass something. And nobody likes to have a 6-5 vote either. For something like this, which is, you know, going to be pretty controversial, however it comes out, they're going to want, if not unanimous, fairly unanimous answers or decisions. So.
Okay, Zoom in has
on this you have some time because you have the listening sessions. Like I say, nothing's been scheduled for committees or for the council yet. Unlike the growth and infrastructure policy, which is it's not on a fast track, it's on the same track as it's always been every 4 years. It's just now we've reached the point where they're about to, the next month go and make decisions. So I'd urge you to sort of not drop this idea, but concentrate on the growth and infrastructure policy and the impact tax laws sooner than later.
Okay, Zoom in, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to mention a book by a woman named Rosa Corey, called Behind the Green Mask, which is available at Rosa Corey, Koire dash B as in boy, G as in green, and M as in mask.com. And I've heard about her, and she was a retired forensic commercial real estate appraiser in California. She specialized in eminent domain valuation, and she was with the California Department of Transportation as an expert witness on land use. And basically she exposed the impact of sustainable development on private property rights and individual liberty. She discovered that some of the things that were happening and that were going to affect her neighborhood were related to what back then was called UN Agenda 21, which has now morphed into UN Agenda 2030, also known as the Great Reset. And their tagline is, in 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. And somebody I know who was a planning expert out in California told me that basically a lot of the cities that are doing or instituting these kinds of things, they're using the same software. I mean, I can understand, like, if you're in an industry, you kind of, buy the package off the shelf that, somebody promotes and says, hey, this is the way that this will help you, to implement your plans. But apparently this is a very concerted effort by entities that are driving a lot of this. Even RFK Jr. recently was saying that, entities such as BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street are really wanting to buy up single family housing and really own all the housing. So I'm just throwing that out there. I realize, not everybody has heard of this. It sounds very conspiratorial, but this woman was an expert in her field and she uncovered this. And so just to put this out there, we're facing a giant, we're facing that Goliath. And even though there were a number of us here on this call, I really don't know how in the world we're going to come up against the Goliath who is supporting this, which would be maybe developers and others who are pushing this. And the same person said that there is so much money behind the scenes that, perhaps maybe even, kind of like mafia, I don't even know what you would call it. Even hard to even think about something like this, in the United States of America. But there are entities that are really behind this. But also one of the things in Corey's book is that there's a real push to basically, I don't want to say bankrupt cities, but, if you end up pushing the limit on development and then the economy goes bust, and right now we're in a pretty bad economy and it's not going to probably get any better. Tax cuts will expire and things like that. I just am thinking, how in the world is the city or is the county even going to be able to help development and such? And it's just nasty. Sorry. So anyway, have you heard of Rosa Corey?
No, I haven't.
Would you please consider checking her website out? She's deceased now, but she has some videos apparently on YouTube, and she has some action items that people can take, but it's rosacorey-bgm.com. Thanks.
Liz Joyce, go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Orlin, I know that you're a numbers person. There was a very interesting column in Adam Pagnuco's blog a few weeks ago about a lack of actual information about the number of units that were permitted before 2019. And even though he's a big fan of the council and he has a lot of data in it, I can send it to you. He was concerned that all of these projections on which the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative is based may have been off base, and significantly so, because if they don't know how many units were built before 2019 or permitted and built, then we've got a problem. And so I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but I'm wondering if you're aware of that problem and how the county usually goes about adjusting for new information that's utterly relevant.
Well, no, I did read, always read Adam's blog. He's one of the best sources of information, frankly, out there with a lack of media in the county. I'm not surprised that the numbers don't match. I'm surprised that they were off by that much. And that I just really don't have an explanation for it. I mean, the folks who've run permitting services over the years, they've been very professional. And, I worked with them for a number of years because I sort of managed the impact tax program, keep a track. And they had kept a very good track in terms of who was paying and how much they were paying and all of this. In terms of the total number of units not matching up, I just don't know. I haven't commented on it. I can't comment on that.
I don't see. Oh, Colleen, go ahead. Let me see. Colleen, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Orlin. I just wondered if you know of any, research findings that answer two things that you referred to, and a third thing that is kind of at play in Tacoma Park as we are having a review of all of our housing policies. The first one is, do you know of any research that shows what you, I think, were saying is your own impression or your own experience, that only high-rise senior housing and McMansions are the kind of construction where it's going to generate more revenue for your tax base than costs? So that'd be one area. Is there any research that you could cite or maybe help find a reference to? And then the second one is on which you said, Bill Husband, his point that you need more housing to drive down cost. I think you said you haven't seen that, but do you know of any definitive research consensus findings on that? And then the third one is that how many more residents do you need to generate more economic activity? Because that would be another argument that's given, in Tacoma Park, for why that if we had a lot more residents, that would actually generate economic activity, which would generate taxes.
Let me answer the last one first. Typically, it's the other way around. The more jobs you have, that generates the need for more employees. Just having more people living in the county doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have more jobs, more growth, unless it's retail kind of jobs, which are we need retail jobs, obviously, with a bigger population, but that's not really what drives the economy. What drives the economy is primary employment, like bioscience, like cybersecurity, like the kind of things that Marc was talking about, and everything else sort of flows from that. That's at least the long-time theory as to how areas grow, is it starts with the jobs. Now, you do want to have an educated workforce. That's why some companies do come to Montgomery County, but it's not the number of people, it's the quality of the folks who are out there. And again, this is a regional market. I mean, if you're creating a cybersecurity kind of institute or business, you're going to draw jobs from everywhere in the region, not just from Montgomery County. As far as your first point about the fiscal impact, I go by basically what I saw in all the fiscal impact statements I've seen over the years, over 25, 30 years, coming from the finance department. They have a model, it was developed by a consulting firm, and I vetted it. It basically is correct. You can argue little bits here and there, but basically shows that certain kinds of developments generate the need for certain kinds of services. Office buildings don't generate the need for schools. Neither is any kind of commercial development. Housing, with the exception of senior housing, and to a certain extent high rise, although less than that now, but there are so many units, and the units are usually childless or maybe one kid. They tend to come out ahead in terms of how much it costs to provide county services to them compared to how much revenue we get in the way of income tax, property tax, and other related county energy tax, other related taxes. And the McMansions, it's interesting because not only because they're large, They generate a lot of property tax and income tax. Folks tend to be pretty high-paying, high-salaried folks. But also, they send a lot of their kids to private schools, which doesn't cost the county anything. Beyond that, everything else costs us money. Again from these studies. I forgot what the middle one was. Sorry, that was any studies about something else. It was the second of your 3 points. Well, whatever it was, I don't have a good answer for it because I couldn't.
Looks like Jerry Garson has a question. Jerry, go ahead.
What will happen in the parts of Montgomery County that will have insufficient parking due to the requirement of 1 spot per unit? Will all the front yards become parking spaces with no impervious areas? Or will there be no parking spaces for all these new houses that are going to only have 1 unit? This has already happened in many parts of Brooklyn. Is this what we want to happen in Montgomery County?
That sounds like a rhetorical question there, Jerry. What do you think the answer is?
Well, I think this is what's going to happen. And you go block after block where there's not a single parking spot available for all these new housing that is going to be 1 spot per unit. I don't think they're quite thinking of what's going to happen. And maybe they do want us to become another Brooklyn, New York, where basically there are many block after block that there's absolutely no parking available for guests or anything else. I mean, I don't understand. Maybe I'm missing something.
No, I agree with you. I mean, and I live in, like I said, in East Bethesda, live on a street which very close to downtown. We have residential parking permit area because we don't want people from the work in Bethesda to be parking on our streets, because there's already a premium on how much space there is on the street to park. We have 2 cars, my wife and I have only 1 car will fit in the driveway, so 1 has to be on the street. And there's oftentimes I'm out with that other car and I can't park except maybe way down the street, sometimes the next block. Now, that's the case now. We have 1 person, like I mentioned, that has an ADU on their property, and she actually widened her driveway. So there's more impervious surface, but there is space at least for 2 cars in her driveway. But yeah, I agree with you.
So we have a question here in the chat says, can any or all of you 3 comment on whether you think the ZTA as proposed would result in wealthy households moving out of the county? And then I guess there would be a fiscal impact to that, right, Glenn?
It sort of depends on the quality of the housing, frankly. You know, the pictures that we see, and remember one of the things we didn't talk about is the planning board saying you can develop by right, but they have to follow what's called a pattern book, which I presume is a set of standards that you're creating essentially an attractive house. Again, the setbacks they have to still operate within the setbacks that are in the zoning code. There's certain restrictions on what you can do. But I'll tell you this, I'm not sure if that's really going to be an issue, because my street, when I moved in 1982, we have 19 houses. 18 of them have mansionized. I'll just use that term over the years. Only 1 is its original shape. And someone mentioned much earlier in this conversation, they're worried about all the construction that's going to happen on the street with these things happening. Well, that happened on our street without any of this. People just wanted to build a bigger house. And for about a 10 or 15 year period, there was construction on our street all the time in one house or another. And it didn't drive people out of the neighborhood. Most people stayed and stayed and stayed. When they sold for a nice price. So I don't think that's so much an issue. That's my own opinion, but I don't have any statistics on that. I can just go by the experience that I've seen in East Bethesda.
So someone here says there's something in what's presented that if a single driveway could be shared between units, then the parking had to be behind the property. So a lot of impervious surface running driveway along the whole side of the property, plus 4 parking spaces covering the backyard.
Well, there's a lot of lots that can't happen. It's just isn't space for. I mean, the setback isn't wide enough to put a driveway. Usually, the driveway only goes to the front of the house, from the street to the front of the house.
Yeah.
Now they may widen the driveway, which is again more impervious surface, and doesn't necessarily add to the attraction of it, but.
And some of those images, I'm sorry, I
No,
just
go
jump
ahead.
in. Some of those images also had some parking in the back, but then also provided, suggested that there would be tandem parking in the driveway, so they're not trying to park everybody in a separate space. You know, tandem parking could get challenging, I would think, but there were different configurations for how parking might be accommodated.
There's a question here is whether or not the county can require driveways to be pervious.
I don't know.
Probably. Or that could probably be part of it.
They could, the pervious standards are not as, there's more flexibility in what's calculated or counted as pervious in other jurisdictions than Montgomery County. They would have the legal authority to do that. Whether they've looked at it in the context of this, I don't think they have. The staff reports that I read said that they were going to try and address stormwater management separately from what they're doing right now with the zoning. And Glenn, I apologize, I didn't mean to jump in on your
No, please do.
your topic here.
Here's a question that's been on my mind. Matt Passanelli asks, it's been on my mind for a while. Apparently the planning book may not be ready before they start acting on ZTAs. And is that, I guess, an issue to address? It would be a good idea to show us the pattern book before they move on to approving ZTAs.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. Yeah, oftentimes on issues like this, which are really complicated, and I've dealt mostly with transportation stuff, is there'll be a bill and then there are follow-up by executive regs. And oftentimes what we've told the department that's producing the bill, give us a draft of what the executive regs might look like. And that'll help us decide whether or not we want to do the bill. And so I think the same thing goes here. I think having the pattern book, or at least a draft of it, or at least several examples, so we know what we're talking about, that might make the council more comfortable approving something. Otherwise, just sort of operating in the dark.
I think the plan is for that to be an administrative process without public comment. But I think that's something that the public could be asking for now. Is to see the pattern book and have an opportunity to comment on it. Because Gwen Wright, when she spoke to us in February, she of course was no longer planning director, a little bit more free to speak her mind, urged the participants in the meeting to pay close attention to the pattern book, that it would be very important in how acceptable these products were going to be in a neighborhood once they're approved. Okay, well, we are out of time. Thank you very much, Dr. Orlin, for all of your time and expertise. It was a pleasure having you here. I appreciate your time. And Michele, you hung into the end. I appreciate your time as well. I'm not sure if Marc is here or not, but if Marc is here, or Debbie, thank you also for your time. I want to just quickly mention we're having a Civic Association meeting, our regular membership meeting on Tuesday night, the 9th. We're going to start talking about a Civic Federation position on attainable housing. So you should be encouraging your Civic Federation to send delegates to that meeting, because this is where the neighborhoods get a chance to weigh in on the Civic Federation's resolution. Also, if you're on the call and your Civic Federation, your civic group is not a member of the Civic Federation, encourage them to join. We need everyone's cooperation and work together on to try to influence the council. So that's my pitch, and for the Civic Federation, and we'll see you all on the 9th, I hope. Thank you to everyone for coming.
Thank you.